Hey everyone, welcome to Sociastrology. Today we're going to take a look at Neptune in Aries. And we'll look at this from a perspective of what we can expect on a collective and a global level. And then we'll take it through sign by sign to see how it's going to impact us personally. We'll also take a bit of a view of similar themes that we've seen across history with this alignment. Now, I did last year do a treatment of specifically the last time that we had this alignment, which was 1861 to 1875. So if you're interested in a deep dive on how Neptune and Aries shaped that time frame, that's where that is, and I will link to that in the description. But today we're going to do more of a future orientation of what we can expect for this to mean for us collectively going forward. So I have the dates here, and you can see how Neptune did move into Aries for a short period of time in 2025, from March 30th to the 22nd of October of 2025. And it's going to be moving permanently into Aries on the 26th of January of 2026, and it'll stay there until May of 2038. And then you can see we get another retrograde period of Neptune in Aries from October of 2038 to March of 2039 as well. So what does this all wind up meaning? Well, when we're dealing with Neptune, these are 14-year periods, generally speaking, in which the sign that Neptune is traversing through and all of the themes, the subjects, the styles, the considerations and concerns of the sign that it's in wind up being glamorized or mythologized. These things wind up pervading the culture for about 14 years. This also then, all of that quality, all of that content winds up infusing the ether. So it winds up impacting the subconscious and the psyche on a collective level through what we're picking up on from the ether. So this is where Neptune winds up functioning, is in the ether. It's in the energy that's around us. And it's recently, for the past 14 years, since 2011, it's been in Pisces. And now it's moving into Aries. So we're moving on from a rather melancholic era, which wound up glamorizing suffering, spirituality, dreams, beauty. And we're now moving into a much more active area. So this new era of very active assertion, effort, intention. There's going to be upsides and downsides to this as well. So that's what we're going to dive into today. Aries is very overt and straightforward, whereas Pisces is very much not. So that's probably going to be one of the aspects that we wind up seeing quite a bit as we move into this era. So I want to cover Neptune here, just Neptune in and of itself. What does it mean? What is it touching on? And then we'll look at Neptune in Aries specifically and what we can expect of the coming 14 years. So if you want to hop ahead, feel free. But what we wind up seeing with Neptune is a focus on unity, connection, and transcendence. So we wind up seeing the ideals of unity, a yearning for limitlessness and boundlessness. And there's this desire to merge, to express and receive compassion and selflessness, and to experience on some level, so on the Aryan level coming up, the dissolution of boundaries. And often this can wind up happening spontaneously. Again, this is working through the ether, so it's not the most conscious of processes. So there is also this quality of transcendence or flowing beyond our outworn boundaries. And it also points toward where we see sacrifice and redemption in society. So for instance, in Aries, we're likely to see that when it comes to workers, when it comes to fighters. Neptune also winds up impacting the culture and collective expression as well. So much of what is impacted by the shifting expressions of Neptune through the signs is seen in spirituality and culture because of the fact that its impact is etheric and even ambient. So it winds up overcoming society slowly and through abstract aspects of the zeitgeist, which is difficult to pinpoint in terms of origin of the influence, but this winds up being developed through cultural beliefs, cultural narratives, and gradually being seen more and more throughout the discourse. So what is it? What's the topic that people are focused on in a given period of time? Neptune and where it is in the sky is going to have a big impact on that. So the expression of an Aryan Neptune winds up infusing our myths, our zeitgeist in ways that spread through popular symbols and stories. Popular in part due to the influence, but also because they're synchronistic with the energies flowing through the ether. So it feels right. That's what winds up feeling right. And it's not just that styles and fashions and the focus of culture comes through in this kind of cult-like way of, oh, well, there are influencers who are telling us what to like. For one thing, a lot of what they are influenced by is Neptune, but also we wind up picking up still on the things that we genuinely like, and we do wind up kind of coalescing around similar ideals. And that is what Neptune does. It brings us together in that way. So think about certain scenes even. Neptune can synchronistically pull us together by having us coalesce around a specific genre in a specific period of time, or a given hobby or a given interest, and pull us into groups with other people as well, thereby uniting us. So that's how Neptune winds up impacting culture. We're basically swimming in its expression, and that expression, the sign that it's in, winds up flowing through us and through those cultural figures that also have a strong influence and impact on culture as well. Stylists and musicians and directors. It impacts what they say and whether we find it appealing as well. And that's the agency that regular people wind up carrying, that winds up deciding whether something's really going to be popular or not, whether it's going to resonate or not. So we can see then how it winds up impacting the arts and glamour, these ideals of form, as well as even propaganda and those narratives that we are more readily persuaded by or feel aligned. That which feels true based on what it is that we're identifying with. So I'll give you a specific example. In Pisces, there was a lot of focus on what we and our groups that we belong to have or feel like we have sacrificed for society. And so there was a lot of identification along the lines of different identity groups and things like this. I would not be surprised if, one, there's a lot more individualism, that we're identifying a bit more on that singular focus of who am I as it moves into Aries, but also with workers. So identifying more strongly as working people. And so we're more likely then to be persuaded by people who are speaking to us as working people, or speaking to us as individuals who are able to make up our own minds about certain things, rather than grouping us together based on a shared sense of grievance. Again, whether or not that grievance is real or not, I certainly have my opinion on which are and which are not. So even looking at this in the sense of truthiness, if you're familiar with that word that Stephen Colbert coined, I want to say it was back during the height of the Iraq War in like 2004 or 2005, of what feels true. That's what Neptune has to do with when it's related to propaganda or political or sociological or societal messaging and narratives and things like that. What feels true. That's what Neptune works with, and that's how Neptune persuades us. And what is it that we want to be unified around as well? So we can even see then, what is the sense of truthiness? Where do we see truthiness, right, in society? That's going to reflect, to a huge extent, the sign that Neptune's in, the way that it's expressing itself. There's also these aspects of common knowledge or common tropes that are also typically in alignment with the sign of Neptune in any given decade and a half. So what is it that we're a little too readily to pick up as a trope or a narrative or a story, or, oh, well, that's just common sense. This is what we assume. This is what we just take as given. Neptune has a lot to do with that as well, and especially when we do that on that collective level. So what Neptune is ultimately working through is the collective unconscious. So this is what creates world historical figures, if you're familiar with that expression. World historical figures, this is a notion I'm pretty sure that came through Hegel. And basically the idea behind it is that there is this narrative, this pressing issue that needs to be addressed. There is a collective concern that needs to be addressed. And in those moments when something comes up and needs to be dealt with, there will be created people who are capable of leading along those lines, who are capable of taking up that mantle and speaking to that concern, and therefore leading the masses who also see this concern toward that goal and creating it. Now, this can be for good or bad. Most leadership figures throughout history are, in some sense or another, world historical figures. Some are more extreme than others. Some are bigger than others. But they wind up making a collective mark upon the age. But we can often see those leadership figures reflecting to us different aspects of the sign that Neptune is in. It also has a huge impact then on consciousness and perception. So the subjects of our dreams, our imagination are also really colored by Neptune. So what is it that we're wanting for ourselves? Even the manner and the style or the guise of intuition and inspiration. What are we inspired to do? And how are we inspired to do it? What do we feel connected to? What does our intuition seem to connect us to? Do we come together to experience a sense of collective spirituality? Or is this something that we feel we're connected to independently, individually? I would say in Aries, a lot of people are likely to go their own way when it comes to spirituality, and also to follow somewhat less ideologically inclined manners of spirituality than in the Jupiter-ruled sign of Pisces, right? Where ideology and religion and spirituality tended to overlap, and the lines between them really wound up blurring quite a bit. So it shows us what we're inclined to idealize, what we're inclined to believe. And the sign of Neptune also winds up showing us the style, the characters, and the through lines of our narratives and even our collective and personal illusions. So what is it that we believe about our own lives? What is it that we are deluded about even in our own lives? And also then collectively as well. So these general movements, the general collective impressions as well. So this winds up shaping and impacting our experience of consciousness, of what we're thinking about, of what we're focused on, as well as the subconscious and what we're naturally gravitating towards and what appeals to us. And therefore, it has a huge impact on influence. So who is influential and even deception? So who is able to deceive us and why? So again, the sign that Neptune's in is going to show us where we're likely to see these things, for better and worse. Neptune also tends to bring a sense of yearning or transcendence around topics ruled by the sign that it's in, as well as mystifying them. And even in extreme cases, there can be a sense of madness or mass delusion around those things. So certainly there were a lot of people talking about mass formation issues. I'll just put it that way. I do try to avoid some trigger words that might upset YouTube. But having that take place recently in Pisces makes quite a bit of sense, because those delusions would be extremely collective, and they would be felt and encouraged together. In Aries, it's going to be a little bit more individual and independent, and we'll talk about how there are downsides to that as well. Both Pisces and Neptune, I know modern astrologers say that Neptune rules Pisces in some way or another. I tend to use traditional rulerships, but there is certainly an overlap in a lot of the themes between Neptune and Pisces, and one of those is going to be that sense of trying to unify things and trying to bring collectives together or to universalize things. And so that's how we can get that kind of really, really, really mass delusion as well, or that mass sense of madness that can come through with Neptune and Pisces as well. Now, there's also these esoteric or higher aspirations that wind up coming through with Neptune. So we can see this on a very subtle level that winds up very subtly shaping and shifting our belief systems and winds up shaping even our mystical inclinations. So how is spirituality faring in public? That's also going to depend upon, one, the forms of spirituality that are in alignment with the sign that Neptune is in. So again, in Aries, it's going to be a lot more independent. It's not going to be as much of identifying with a denomination or something like this. It's going to be more along the lines of, I am non-denominational spiritual, generally speaking, and I follow the things that resonate with me personally. But there are signs that are more or less inclined to support spirituality, generally speaking, and Pisces really inclines toward that. So there was this real upswelling of spirituality after Neptune moved out of the very skeptical sign of Aquarius, when we had the whole new atheism movement with Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, etc., and moved much more into spiritualized identities or even religious identities as Neptune moved into Pisces in about 2011. And that's when that skeptic movement really saw a decrease in influence. So we're likely to see that kind of thing again, with people less identifying with collective spiritualities and more with just one's own personal sense and experience of spirituality. So there can even wind up being themes of sacrifice or sublimation or selflessness that arise in ways that reflect the sign as well. Again, I think that, for instance, valor or military sacrifice is likely to be really held on high as Neptune is moving through Aries. We're also likely to see a huge amount of courage and selflessness along those lines of protecting people physically, but also then the sublimation of that. So rather than active physical assertion, just being very strong in one's voice and commanding in that sense, commanding the ideas, commanding the narrative, commanding the age for better and worse. So hopefully, for instance, there's not some stolen valor issues coming up, but that could also be a thing. Now, let's talk about this in terms of mundane astrology. I love this kind of thing because it's a little bit easier to get your hands on, especially with the outer planets, as to what it is that they're ruling. Neptune is notoriously difficult to describe because the way that it impacts is specifically under the surface, and it's specifically in these weird kind of subtle, abstract, difficult to define kinds of ways. But it does also rule some areas, or have a huge influence rather, over certain areas of actual physical life. So it has a huge amount to do with shipping and anything that winds up moving across boundaries. That's the main thing that Neptune is going to rule, is that which crosses boundaries, because it doesn't see boundaries. It's not so much that, Neptune has a personality disorder and it doesn't care about your boundaries. It's more that it is so extremely esoteric that, for instance, if you look at the universe on a physical level, there aren't actually really boundaries. So it's so abstracted that it's not really looking at things in that way. And so we can see it play out even in the physical, where we care a little bit more about those boundaries on Earth and things like that. So when it comes to shipping, Neptune in Aries is going to have a lot to do with that. Hopefully it doesn't martialize it quite a bit. Hopefully it doesn't wind up exacerbating some of the trade controls that we're seeing. But I think that part of the reason why we are seeing that around this time is because, for instance, on March 30th, just before Liberation Day, Neptune moved into Aries and we saw a major clampdown on trade and we saw trade wars, right? So shipping is going to be a big thing, but also Neptune crosses those boundaries. You can throw a boundary up. Neptune isn't it's going to find a way around that, basically. So I also think that there will be ways found around that. And so the next thing that I have here, like obfuscation, fraudsters, thieves, undermining the boundaries that are put up in that sense as well. There's always black markets to move around what is martialized or what is controlled from top down, right? In addition then to shipping, we can also expand that into different areas, pipelines, undersea cables, the flow of fluids, so oil, gas, water. It literally influences the waters of all sorts. So hopefully the waters will not be more violent when Neptune is in Aries, but I would expect that they will be. We may even have problems of metals or something in our waters and things like this, and fighting over water, certainly. So it's ruling anything that moves beneath the surface or across boundaries. So contraband, smuggling as well, the literal oceans and all maritime affairs as well. So shipping lanes, piracy, undersea exploration as well. We're likely to see a lot of pioneering underwater and then pioneering outside of the bounds of the Earth as well. So undersea and space exploration, Neptune is going to be hugely supportive of that. Also mysteries, things that are hidden. This rules that as well. And we may see a lot of pioneering of breaking through the invisible or breaking through veils that have obscured our vision of certain things. So even on a physical level, so physics, breaking out of a lot of the confines, or maybe on a level of, for instance, string theory, where it's been so difficult, like the math seems to add up, and yet we haven't been able to actually observe a lot of aspects of this. That could help us with that being in Aries, which is very pioneering and which breaks through obstacles. Hopefully it can help us to see certain things that usually are very mysterious and difficult to see. So we're also very likely then to see a lot of ocean-related disasters. So maybe oil spills, again, tsunamis, lost ships even. So the sacrifice of a ship or violence against ships. Again, Neptune already moved into Aries for a period of time. It just hopped back into the 29th degree, the very last degree of Pisces. We're pretty much in this energy. And notice that we've seen this quite a bit in the past year since March 30th, is attacks on vessels. we're likely to see more of that. Submarines, espionage, also very strongly associated with Neptune. So covert operations, psyops even are likely to take on more of an Aryan influence, which could help because maybe they'll be easier to see and they'll be less confusing, in fact. But spies, intelligence agencies, Neptune has some to do with those. That is also the purview of Pluto. Both of these have a lot to do with what is underground or difficult to see. It's not on the surface. But yeah, any sort of entities that operate in secrecy and underneath the surface of public awareness, Neptune has some say over those things. Fashion and fantasy, also major areas of Neptune. So the prevailing vibe or aesthetic of an era as well, what society collectively idealizes and escapes into. So one thing is, and I think I've mentioned this before, I've tried to be gentle about this just in case I don't want to upset anyone. I am very much not into body shaming or anything like that. But the whole everyone trying to look the same with Neptune and Pisces, and also the invasive procedures that have gone on with people's faces and people's bodies recently, as we've had Neptune and Pisces and Uranus and Taurus, which has a lot to do with approaching beauty in unusual ways or in invasive ways. I think that that's going to start to wear off. And I'm a little bit worried about, I guess people could always get procedures to start to look less like everyone else too. But I think that that standard face that people have been looking for recently is going to be out, very much out. And it's going to be more of natural individual beauty that's going to be coming through and that will be glamorized. So unique and individual and true and authentic forms of beauty, I think, are going to be really supported by this Neptune as it moves into Aries. We can also see the weaponization of confusion, generally speaking, with Neptune, but definitely as Neptune moves into Aries. So Neptune can wind up representing like state-sponsored misinformation. Deep fakes are definitely going to be under the purview of Neptune as well. The whole post-truth era is also very much under Neptune's purview, where objective reality is basically dissolved into compelling narratives. But I think that some of that is going to wear off by people utilizing critical thinking more as Neptune moves into Aries and making up their own minds rather than getting sucked into, well, everything is relative. With Neptune and Aries, it's going to be less of everything is relative and post-truth and more one's own specific experience of things, and not so easily being able to be persuaded by lies that someone else is saying about one's own experience. Like, someone else can't tell me what I'm experiencing as well when Neptune is in Aries than when it's in Pisces, right? I hope that makes sense. So also the film industry, photography, any medium that winds up creating illusions and images is going to be under the purview of Neptune. And not just like the film, not just the movie, but also movie stars. So the ideal projected image, what it is that we're looking for in those figures that we idealize or that we see typically in these idealized forms. Additionally, spiritual groups and cults are also going to be under the purview of Neptune, and those are also going to be more Aryan than Piscean now. So there's going to be less of this kind of hand-wavy, we're all one persuadability of people. There's still likely to be attempts toward cults of personality, and sometimes that is going to happen, where people create a sense of specialness around themselves and create a cult around themselves with Neptune and Aries around the individual. But I do think that it's actually going to be less persuasive, considering the fact that all of the members of that cult of personality, right, they're also going to be a little bit more selfish or self-centered. I hate to use that term, but if you are not serving someone's individual ego in some way with the cult of personality that you are creating around yourself, I don't know how long that's actually going to be persuasive for very many people when Neptune moves into Aries. It's interesting. If it does serve their ego, then I think that there's a bigger risk. Now, mobs and gangs are also under the purview of Neptune. So we are likely to see sometimes violent mobs and violent gangs and things like that. So mass violence, unfortunately, as it winds up moving into Aries. Sedition is also something that Neptune has to do with. And forgotten or marginalized groups, those who are invisible to society, who have fallen through the cracks. There's also collectivities and collectivists. Communists are also all under the purview of Neptune. We've seen, especially this time, and especially on the front end of this Neptune transit, Saturn is also with Neptune, and the Saturn-Neptune conjunction tracks most strongly with communism and communist efforts since the kind of advent of communism back in the 1840s, when under a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, that text was published. Now, every time that a Saturn-Neptune conjunction in and of itself has come up, there's been these mass pushes and a lot of focus, like the Red Scare also wound up taking place under a strong Saturn-Neptune conjunction. But Neptune itself has to do with that collectivism and communism as well. Socialism, basically collective efforts and efforts that are focused on the collective good. This also has a lot to do with the manner of escapism, which is collectively experienced. So unfortunately, we saw a lot of drug use and a lot of opiate issues with Neptune and Pisces in particular. Also a lot of spiritual bypassing of problems like on a collective level with Neptune and Pisces as well. We're going to see that in a more overt way in Aries, which we'll discuss. But also the ether, again, the connections between things, communities, that which pulls things together, but also then pandemics, which can cross boundaries, like viral things that can cross boundaries from one person to another or one animal to another, etc. Mysterious illnesses or toxins can wind up creeping in, leaching through, and that's a Neptunian thing as well. So with all of that said, just an overview of how Neptune tends to function on the collective level and also on a personal level with all of those topics. Let's now get really into Neptune and Aries and the impacts that we're likely to see on culture and consciousness here. So on a positive or kind of more noble level, this will be very helpful in elevating creativity, energy, enthusiasm, a lot of courage as well. There's going to be an aggrandizement of fearlessness and respected leadership. So those that stand out well as leaders, those that we do identify with strongly, those leaders are going to be even more individually and personally venerated for what they bring to the table. There's also going to be a major pervasive love of challenge and moral championing, so defending others as well. We're likely to see a much more clear direction and decisiveness on a collective level too, and a lot of veneration of individuality and authenticity, things like this. We're also likely to see a lot of focus on the new or newness. And it's going to be really important because things are going to be coming up from the ether at a much more rapid pace with Neptune and Aries than when it was in Pisces. Adaptation or adapting to the new changes is going to be really, really important. So we will need to try and stay on our toes a bit. But the plus side of that is that we're less just stuck in the mud. We're less just stuck in these stupid narratives. This, the stupidest timeline. We're getting out of the stupidest timeline, I have to say. We are stepping into something that will require us to be a bit more alert. Active spiritual practice is also very likely. So not just the spiritual bypassing and, claims and things like this, but active practice and applied spirituality, even applied religion. Like, are you really a Catholic if you're not actively engaged in charity or something like this? Those are the kinds of questions that are going to be coming up within religion. And also those that are venerated are those that are going to be actively applying their spirituality and their religion. Now, on the downside of that, we also then have notions of crusading, right? But creating communities, active participation in communities, which I think has been something that's been very neglected recently. Also very active idealism. So what are your ideals? And then behaving in accordance with them, acting in accordance with them. So this is going to be great for like mutual aid efforts, again, collective efforts. We're likely to actually see people stepping up with Neptune in Aries. And of course, we saw that over the summer when it creeped in. Now, this is a bit of a quiet winter that we have right now, but I think, again, we see that come up quite a bit again. And maybe we even see the stirring now in the springtime with Neptune and Aries year after year around collective movements, around courage, will, decisive action. Aries also represents, just straightforwardly, a new cycle for humanity when it comes to Neptune and the topics that Neptune has purview over. So there's a very initiatory energy to all of that. That's that newness that I was speaking to, a lot of initiation. Now, on the negative side, the poor expression, we are likely to see a relative lack of sensitivity compared to the previous 14 years, especially the previous 14 years minus the last 2.5. So I would say from 2011 to 2023, the level of sensitivity that we saw on a collective level during that period of time, we're likely to see less of it than that period of time. Now, Saturn also wound up getting into Pisces, and it started to deny some of that sensitivity. And so that's why we saw a little bit of complication around those issues since 2023. But Neptune isn't going to be waving that banner of sensitivity quite as much. It's going to be waving a banner of, okay, but what are you actually doing about that? And kind of denying any claims to sensitivity that are not acted upon anyway. So there will be acts of needless aggression as well, violent eruptions, very selfish assertiveness at times, taking from others without regard as well as Neptune moves into Aries. Now, this is just the downside, and this isn't going to be constant, but this is going to be some of what Neptune is encouraging in Aries as well. There will even be issues of collective feelings of rage or anger that are acted upon collectively or glorified as well. So imagine like grandstanding and yelling and putting one's anger very much on display, right? There's also likely to be incidents or fears around mass killing, unfortunately, mass violence, masses or groups or societies or cults that are built up around that too. And that may become a real problem, as would terror then become a problem around that. Also likely to be notions of like fears of the masses. Again, I think that we've seen that come up so strongly since springtime this year and more into the discourse as well. So looking at all of the bunkers that these billionaires have that are trying to protect themselves from what they imagine that the masses will do if those billionaires wind up getting their way, right? I think that there's going to be a lot of pushing of those narratives. But again, if people are engaged in critical thinking and people are more likely to identify not with these hand-wavy notions that billionaires put out for us on high that are actively trying to distract us and divide us. If we are deciding on a critical thinking level of, no, this is who I am, and this is actually what's in my interests, then I think that the masses are less likely to fall into the trap of the fears of the masses that we've seen. So it's going to be a bit of a mixed bag there, I think, and I hope that I've made that somewhat clear. The more that we can really think for ourselves, I think the better. And trying not to be as fearful as Neptune would encourage us to be, I think over the next 14 years is also going to serve us on a personal level quite well. Now, this is also going to bring up a lot of notions of conflict and force, so direct conflict, and under this influence, we're likely to see an increase in discourse around matters of war or weapons, and the individualism of this can wind up leading to notions of being an army of one, or can wind up increasing the heck out of vigilantism or belligerence, personal individual belligerence of I'm going to forcefully make my mark on the world come what may, and be really fearless and delusional about that as well. So unfortunately, I think we see some unsettled people acting out during this period of time, but on an individual level as well. So using brute force or domination, there's likely to be a weird glorification around domineering at times with this influence as well. But again, I think we then get backlash to that because there may be this weird, gross desire to see other people domineered too. But on an individual level, we're not going to want to be domineered too. We're not going to want to be just led like sheep when Neptune is in Aries. So I don't think that is the most successful thing, but I think that it gets its day in the sun here and there from new leaders, right? Also likely to see a lot of confrontation to enforce one's own worldview upon others. Kind of a similar energy, but confrontationally saying one's own worldview or one's own narrative or one's own perspective and trying to enforce that upon others as well. So we're likely to see a lot of activity around protests, strikes, even riots. And some of this is going to revolve around gun and defense groups or militias, police, military, things like that, or we'll see that all mixed together. The activists and the police, the strikes and the military, things like this. Again, there's likely to be matters of crusading or hopefully on a better level fighting for rights. And a lot of that is going to be glorified as righteous. So I do worry about the kind of righteousness of crusading problem that could wind up arising with Neptune and Aries, and it's going to be worth keeping our eyes open for, especially considering who's defense secretary right now and the tattoos, let's say, that he has. So arguments are going to be made that might makes right as well. That was a major thing that wound up coming up last time. I think I went into that in the previous video around that phrase of might makes right. And the idea that this somehow excuses rule breaking or criminality or terror on someone else's perspective. So for instance, might makes right, and therefore I'm allowed to cross boundaries, Neptune, violently, Aries, because I am able to, because might makes right. And so it's right. And so it's righteous because I'm able to. That kind of like insane tautological perspective that we're likely to see with Neptune and Aries in a probably very maddening way. But also competition and power projection are going to be a major thing with this too. So we're likely to see in the kind of confrontational aspect of this Neptune issues of us versus them, or this kind of zero-sum thinking. Like we can't all win. I need to win everything and you need to lose. And that needs to be clear kind of problem that I think we're going to see with troubled minds, but also geopolitically, unfortunately, and like needing to be the best and needing to be first. So this kind of fragile ego issue will likely turn into imposition or control or authoritarianism or grandiosity, basically, to build oneself up then, to escape from any sort of notion that one is equal amid the collective, or that one isn't better or more authoritative than others. So those fragile egos are going to act out at times. I think they'll burn themselves out a bit early in this. And I think that they're also going to run straight into walls, like some really hard walls that they're going to break their noses on if they do this right out the gate, because Saturn's going to be there as well. And boy, is it going to wind up really imposing some controls here. Neptune may try to cross boundaries and not see them and create escape routes for people who are not able to deal with their own ego in a healthy Aryan way, of being able to just be an individual and not needing to be the most special of all among the masses, right? Saturn's not going to allow for that. Saturn's going to impose those boundaries. And if people cross the individual boundaries of other people, they will deal with consequences. So it's going to be some popcorn moments on the front end of this, but it's also going to be a bit stomach churning to see some of it, I hate to say. So we're likely to see a lot of grandstanding, for better and worse, as well as notions of sovereignty, as well as violations of sovereignty, as well as ideologies of supremacy come up and be dealt with throughout this time. So there's going to be problems around people and societies being very uncompromising, or enforcement that is unilateral in nature and projecting power, things like this. Again, I think we'll see a lot of that on the global geopolitical level to a gross degree, which means not really making a lot of friends in a genuine way. I think that that's going to be very weird, and especially from the way that the US likes to delude ourselves as being the friend of all nations and the leader of all nations and so forth. Of course, there's snickering from all corners of the globe at that kind of a notion. But again, thinking about how this administration has so, through its domineering of other nations, sometimes with no benefit whatsoever except to build up a specific fragile ego of one individual relative to other nations and other nations' leaders that may be more competent and therefore will, in the long term, be better supported by Saturn, Neptune, and Aries. But we've seen that notion of the togetherness and the unity of the world start to fade away with that Neptune in Aries, and less of a friendly attitude, less of an idea of the rules apply everywhere that the US typically deludes itself with. Now we're actually going to have to deal with the fact that we haven't been like that for some time. So there are some upsides and downsides to mask off moments like a Neptune in Aries, right? So we're also likely to see an increase in religious extremism under this influence, unfortunately. And some of that is going to be physically confrontational as well. I think that Austin Coppock has also pointed out issues of satanic panics that have come up in the past. And I have seen that increase in recent months as well. So, and that being on the front end, he mentioned it in the context again of the Saturn-Neptune conjunctions in the past that have corresponded with that. Not only do we have one of those, but I also would associate that kind of thing with Neptune and Aries as well. So this could wind up also manifesting as increased anti-Semitism or increased Islamophobia, if you can believe it, unfortunately. So those increases that have divided and that have weaponized spirituality and religious identities and things like this, the hatred, the crusading, etc. Neptune and Aries, it would wind up impacting that. It would wind up, again, front end encouraging that kind of thing. But I think that this does wind up resolving to individuals. The fact that we aren't just our identities. We are individuals and we should be respected on that level. So hopefully this winds up just resolving itself in these coming years. But of course, I can't sugarcoat it. There's going to be some ugly moments that are difficult for those of us who are especially upset by those kinds of things. So in many, many, many different ways, for good and for bad, a lot of people are going to be seeing themselves as participating in spiritual warfare. So these notions of identifying evil in society. So for instance, Peter Thiel and other kinds of like sociopathic evil people in the world. Yes, people are going to be identifying that correctly, and they will be seeing themselves as holding a banner of goodness and kindness and these much better qualities of taking care of people. And they'll be very active in doing so and in counterbalancing the evil that has really come to power in an extreme way in recent years. But also then when we're looking at, for one thing, the other side. So for instance, who but Peter Thiel, claiming that there are others that are, I forget who he said was like the Antichrist or whatever, but he's obviously an insane and evil person. I think a lot of us can see that at this point, and more people will, in the coming years. And so on that side as well. And then on the side of supremacists and say Christian nationalists and people like this, they're also going to be seeing themselves as those spiritual warrior crusaders. So it's going to be a mixed bag, big time. I hate to say it, but at least we're not all just complacent and sitting around wondering when someone's going to wind up stepping up. I think a lot of us wind up stepping up together here. And there's certainly a hell of a lot of power in numbers of individuals that come together around a cause during this transit. So, and also a lot of these people are going to run into walls and break their noses early on with Saturn in the mix too. Also, a lot of pioneering and initiative is going to be seen here. Aries is the first sign. It is the pioneer. It is the most initiating sign that there is as the fire cardinal sign. So this era will also likely see many more vanguards than usual. So those out front movements, the vanguards, and even culturally speaking, like avant-garde. So out front movements, pioneering social and other kinds of groups as well. And particularly, we could see this around direct action or even participatory democracy, I think is likely to be a major topic of discussion. So that individuals should be able to make their mark on how society is functioning. So no longer just blue team or red team and we never get what we want, but rather I am an individual, I am a citizen of this nation, and I should be able to vote on specific initiatives and things like this and what we want, right? So again, participatory democracy, not just centralized politics where you are ostensibly supportive of one team or another. So we're also likely to see all manner of adventurism. So an increased culture around frontier mentality, like self-employment, self-reliance, off-gridding, survivalism, but also adventuring, like being courageous and just going off on one's own and doing one's own thing in any manner of different ways that may feel like a challenge, that feels like it takes courage on an individual level. So where is it that we require courage to act? That's exactly, I think, where we're going to really feel encouraged to take that kind of action, right? So additionally, though, on the frontier mentality aspect, pushing boundaries or even disregard for boundaries when it comes to national sovereignty and things like this, or individual sovereignty of other people. Yes, some are going to be very pushy under this influence. And so it'll be important to have strong boundaries with Neptune and Aries, because we will need to assert those on an individual level here and there. We're also likely to see a lot of threads of innovation and exploration alongside the unification that Neptune tends to bring up within any sign that it's in, and the restoration that winds up typically coming through with Neptune and Aries, or making things new again. That's something that Neptune and Aries tends to show us, is how do we restore something? How do we bring something together in a way that makes it new again, or fresh again, or good? So there's likely to be kind of aggrandizement as well around executive action or executive faculties or quickness, and especially quickness of imagination and mind. This is also going to have a lot to say about the self and individualism, generally speaking. So this is going to be an era of increased individualism, a sense of personal drive toward one's own ideals. And a lot of this will come along with aggrandizement of a real or a feigned self-belief, of ambition, of a kind of bootstraps mentality, or even of individual sacrifice. So building that up and glorifying that of, well, at least I pushed myself to do something new, to try something new, to be myself, even if it required some sacrifice, even if some of it didn't work. This is what did, and I'm proud of myself for that. But there can also then be Neptune feigning those things. And there may be some major individuals and figures that are pushing that kind of thing, but that it's very much not real. So that bootstraps mentality from a Nepo baby or something like this as well. Now, there will also then be issues around use and abuse of power, and in many cases, the refusal even of outside authority as people wind up asserting notions of sovereign boundaries. Now, some of this, I think, will come through as an increase in sovereign movements, but also as individuals, we do have rights, and we will be fighting for those rights, and we will be asserting those rights and the personal boundaries that those rights have provided for us. We're also likely to see a lot of bragging and discourse around effort, willpower, authenticity, like making your mark. And these are going to be seen as virtues through this period of time. But we're also then going to see, like I said, a lot of false aggrandizement or cults of the self or self-deluding in all manner of ways as well. And alongside then glorifying power, we're likely to see notions of social Darwinism arise again. So very similar then to this matter of bootstraps mentality from Nepo babies, where they're just kind of making it up and they're applying it to other people, but it doesn't really make sense. But it might make them feel good, which on an individual level is also something that this Neptune in Aries is going to create some risk around. Is, does it make me feel good? Then that's what's true. That's what's real, right? So we're likely to see a lot of stories and people pushing limits of their own bodies or of others, which wind up spurring concerns over sovereignty and boundaries and borders and things like this. So people pushing themselves and their bodies too far and concern around that, but also then concerns again over national sovereignty and things like this as well. Emancipation was clearly a thing. Now realize last time that in 61 to 75, clearly a word that had a lot to do with the zeitgeist then. we're likely to see a lot of that as well. That's a word that wasn't coming to mind that suddenly just kicked in. That may be another thing, is emancipation. Maybe there is an issue of parenting that winds up coming up and we wind up seeing more children emancipating themselves. But emancipation, generally speaking, I think is somehow going to wind up in the discourse again. Also, Aries is the baby of the zodiac. It's the first sign. And especially in the first several years here, the first 5 years or so, as Neptune is in the first decan or the first 10 degrees of Aries, that is a very tiny baby part of Aries, right? So it's working on individuation. It's working on trying to make itself a real person, right? A real individual in, though, an infantile way. Now, there's a lot of courage in that, and there's a lot to be respected in a baby that is realizing that it's an individual and that it's separate from other things and that it can't just always have its way. But we are likely to see a lot of the child come through with Aries, with Neptune and Aries here. So youthful and impulsive expression is going to be a big thing here. There's going to be this strong childlike nature to Neptune and Aries, and we're likely to witness even more childlikeness or childishness across the spectrum. So yes, infantile actions and stupidity, rash action, and things like that. Impulsiveness is going to be a problem, but also people being youthful, people reclaiming their youth. Now, on the other side of that, also anti-aging, I think, is going to become a really big thing and replace a lot of the surgeries and so forth. But also just a lot of strong youth culture. Possibly there's a lot of things pointing to 2026 and beyond as this kind of cultural renaissance. I feel like we are very much stepping into a completely new zeitgeist, and young people are going to have a lot to do with that. So I think we'll be looking to them to pull us into a new era. And so on the one hand, again, this is going to spur on anti-aging and infantilism, like infantilization even, ideals, which creeps me out a bit, and that may creep a lot of us out quite a bit. Again, that's been a huge topic of discussion recently since Neptune the first time moved into Aries on March 30th, is the infantilization of the ideal form for some people that have illegal psychological issues, right? Again, I'm avoiding some certain trigger words, but I think we all know what we're talking about here. It's also, though, this infantilism going to be on an individual level. So people acting infantile, and that can manifest then as mass Neptune tantrums with Aries as well. Mass irresponsibility, mass rashness as well. And this can wind up pervading the culture. And so on that level, we might want to watch out a bit for and maybe try to guide some of the younger people out of things that could be really, really dangerous for them because it's culturally popular or something like this. So there's likely to be a lot of influence toward irresponsibility, and not just of children, but naturally that's what we concern ourselves with a bit more, especially when someone has their whole future ahead of them and maybe they wind up with an irreconcilable injury, or they wind up with an irreconcilable criminal record or something that winds up ruining their future due to a rash decision that was infantile or something like this, right? So we're likely to see throughout society those issues that we expect from teen boys when they are in groups. So sociologically speaking, this is a demographic that is unique in some very first decan Aryan ways. We're likely to see that more throughout the society and not just among those groups of teen boys when they get together. So speed issues, risk-taking, antisocial tendencies, cultures of vice, edgelordism, this is all going to be an issue, not just with those groups. So I'm not looking forward to that, but we'll see how that winds up going. Also, in terms of the substances that people wind up taking, it's not going to be the same ones. It's not going to be the opiates. It's going to be more so, I think, uppers and things like that. Now, with that said, let's quickly dive into some similar themes that I always wind up seeing come up whenever I'm looking at Neptune in Aries throughout the past. So there's always this, Aries is ruled by Mars. Mars separates things. It cuts things. It looks at itself as one, and it looks at that which is outside of it as an object that it either wants to go after or like for good or for bad. Let's say it wants to go after it to claim it, or it wants to go after it to destroy it, right? So that's something that we do see as an element of Aries. No offense to like Aries sun people or Aries placements or whatever. But that is very different from the unification ideal of Neptune. And so we see, yes, a push and a pull. Some of the key dynamics that wind up showing up throughout history is that there's a push and a pull between separation/individuation and unity. We, of course, saw this the last time through the Civil War, where we had both the splitting apart of the nation and then the reunification of the nation as well, the restoration as well. So there are periods of rapid social change that come through with Neptune and Aries, and they typically wind up involving either war or succession crises, not just seceding, like part of a nation seceding or a split, like succession crises. So who follows on from the leader? And what's funny is that the U.S. is, a specific party within the U.S. is actually going through a projected into the future crisis of this sort right now. And we see a lot of infighting around who's going to hold up that mantle, and a lot of gripping and clawing at each other to claim the mantle of this movement that's probably actually dying out, but there's efforts to claim all of the pieces of that to create something to coalesce around. So, you know, we've seen this with Shapiro and J.D. Vance and Erica Kirk and Tucker Carlson, even now Mike Pence, and all manner of others. Now, there's also typically a lot of systemic strain that is worked through Neptune and Aries periods of times. So that can be like crises of legitimacy, where authority is challenged or needs to be redefined or needs to be rebuilt or newly justified, basically, whether it be on a religious basis or a legal basis or a national basis. There are typically these crises of legitimacy that wind up coming through, which is very fascinating. There's also patterns of this that they go across the board here through imperial history, through feudal history, in industrial societies and bureaucratic societies. This tends to come up. So it's not just in one specific way. It is that there is a kind of collective crisis, because Aries can also represent that crisis point of a need to respond, a need to initiate something new. And Neptune can create the circumstances for that in order to spur that on, certainly. So it doesn't matter what kind of society this is. And it doesn't matter, for instance, what country. Authority is going to need to legitimize itself again on a basis that makes sense for now, not for the past. There's a huge amount of social transformation through these periods of time, and societies are generally reorganizing themselves very rapidly. So expect that globally. Regardless of what country you're in, expect to see that. So there's also then this link that winds up coming up between violence and transformation with Neptune and Aries as well. So there's a very unusually high correlation between civil wars or conquest, these kind of state shaping conflicts as well, like border disputes, and again, pulling things together, pulling nations together. During the last time, I think we had German unification and Italian unification also took place in the 60s, 70s of the 19th century, as well as extremely coercive or enforced reforms internally as well, even if there's not this warlike aspect to these things, right? These periods of time in the past when we've had Neptune and Aries definitely wind up showing us that violence changes not just borders, but also winds up changing what the rules are and what the sense of society is. And so it looks like that's something that winds up spurring on the increased violence, is a need to redefine things, right? Now, one thing I will just point out here is that it did stand out to me quite a bit that NATO has its Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and North Node in Aries. It also has its own Neptune in Libra. So this is likely to put a lot of strain on that alliance. and may include it needing to either re-legitimize itself or that it's actively utilized in some way. So that is something to keep an eye open on, is NATO, to not overlook that. As the US is going through its own issues and the EU is going through its own issues, that NATO as well will be dealing with some reorganization and redefinition and so forth. So there's a lot of schisms in history, basically, with Neptune and Aries. So especially religious schisms, but you can see how in each case that I'm going to point out, these were also societal schisms and schisms around meaning and belief that winds up narrative, basically culture that winds up coming up. So they wind up impacting authority and tradition, and they represent in and of themselves legitimacy crises that wind up impacting these kinds of broader social changes. So the Great Schism itself wound up occurring in 1054. That was under Neptune and Aries. Neptune was in Aries from 1042 to 1057. So that wound up splitting the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. And there were a bunch of excommunications, I think on both sides, if I remember correctly. And there was a major permanent then division into like this Western and Eastern sense of society and organization around Christianity. And so there were these issues of like papal authority as well. And of course, there's then the Neptune, the problem of icons. And I forget the word for that, but the utilization of icons, basically. We also then had a split in the language of the churches of Latin and Greek, right? So we also then had the Western Schism took place under Neptune and Aries. So I think that was, I have here 1378 to 1417, and that started under Neptune and Aries, and that Neptune and Aries was from 1370 to 1384. And so the Catholic Church wound up dividing during that period of time into rival popes. And so there was one pope in Rome and one in Avignon. There was a third one at some point or another, and it basically wound up undermining trust in the church authority and it wound up pushing reform movements as well. It wound up spurring that on. So we can see how like there's this underlying need to redefine things that winds up creating these splits that create a crisis that needs to be dealt with in some way. Also, the Protestant Reformation, part of that was under this influence as well. So Luther had already basically done his thing. This had already started around 1517, but Neptune was in Aries from 1533 to 1548 when this really started to gain steam and become kind of crystallized. So the Anglican Church started in 1534 under Neptune and Aries. Calvinism also started to catch on in 1536. And the significance here is that division between Catholic and Protestant branches is very much permanent at this point, especially with the advent of the Anglican Church. So it ended, for sure, religious unity and the hope of that in Western Europe. And it wound up sparking some religious wars as well, which, Neptune and Aries, right? Finally, then, in this last time, not only, of course, did we have the schism within the United States about whether the South was going to be a part of the Union or not, but we also had the First Vatican Council, which wound up creating a schism within Catholicism as well. And the issue was this notion of papal infallibility. And that wound up splitting the church into the Roman Catholic Church and then the Old Catholic Church. And so this winds up showing us this resistance to centralized authority also impacting modern religion as well. Like this isn't just, these old times where people are fighting about religion and stuff like that. Expect that now. Expect that within like more of like the Baptist movement or Catholicism. Look at the strains of Catholicism right now and the extremes of difference right now. I grew up in a Catholic family. I wasn't Catholic, but there were always these notions of being charitable and being kind and taking care of people and so on and so forth. And that to me was the Catholic tradition, and that it genuinely was. And I mean, there was even like the socialist worker movement in the United States among Catholics, which was very much about mutual aid and taking care of people and so forth. And now we have literally anti-empathy, pro-death, pro-war, pro-hatred of the poor Catholics, like Catholic strains coming up that don't make any sense. But there's definitely going to be a schism there. Like Catholicism, generally speaking, is going to have to deal with that problem. And so this new pope may have a lot on his plate to try to deal with that. And there may be, again, another schism. So we can see here then that across history, there's periods of schism that are coinciding here with these social stressors and social transformation that's underpinning all of this. So yes, on the surface, it looks like a religious schism. It looks like religious disagreement, but it's actually a disagreement between individual realities, right? And individual narratives. And some people saying, look, your worldview does not align with mine, and your values and your belief about this religion that we all purportedly belong to, I fundamentally disagree with you, and so I'm going to split off and join this other group, right? And it's ultimately these crises of authority and legitimacy. So whether that's religious or political or social or national, governmental, institutional, however, it's regularly challenged. Authority is. It is redefined throughout these periods of time. It needs to be restructured often throughout these periods of time as well. And so imagine how that winds up taking place in a lot of nations where probably a lot of people are going to be getting stirred up into notions of participatory democracy and things like that, and active movements and actively participating in society and in narrative shaping and in changing what society is ideally working toward. So it's a tall order for leadership. It's going to be a big, big, big thing. And especially again on the front end with Saturn in Aries in so many different ways that I don't want to get into quite yet. That is going to flow into these legitimacy crises in such a huge way. So social cohesion is basically being negotiated and negotiating between unity versus separation across the board here. So it's going to be active. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be a big change. I am honestly looking forward to it. I think that active participation of individuals and human beings in our society is better than the hands-off hoping and praying that our leaders do the right thing kind of thing that we've been stuck in for quite some time here. Now, yeah, it would be nice if we could effortlessly move into a more idealized society, but no, we're going to have to push for it. We're going to have to fight for it. We're going to have to be active toward that with this Neptune and Aries and so many of the other alignments that are going on with the outer planets during this period of time. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for this treatment of Neptune in Aries. So thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate it. And if you don't mind giving the video a thumbs up or hype, would also really greatly appreciate that, as it helps the video to spread around. It helps the channel. And do consider sticking around by subscribing. We tend to do videos like this where we look at major transits from a collective and a political and global perspective. And then we also look at it from the perspective of how it's going to impact our own charts personally as well. So if that is of interest to you, then I would love to have you here for future videos. And there's also information in the description box below about personal readings and membership perks, like weekly forecasts and monthly courses. So go ahead and check that out. And finally, thank you so much to the members of this channel for your support. So thank you so much to Angel Niblock, JJ, Michelle Howell, Deborah Keel-Leavitt, Patrick McKenney, Jody, Anne Marie, C. Rezer, Peace Out, Rachel Windholtz, the Z-Man 1291, Aya, Lynn Newman, Long T Standing, the Nelson Cat Maya, Connie D. Martino, Dolly Geezy, Mango JT, B Love, Startlingly True, Grace, Psyche Lloyd, Noah, Aquarian Antiquarian, Susan Martin, Chad W., Jonathan Mason, David LaRosa, Adrian K., SP, Teresa Jones, Sherry Lee is, Horse Dog Notebook, Nioke Beam, Justice League Pie, Ashley Gonzalez, Create, Gales Tarot and Astrology, Talitha McKenzie, Kay from NH, Pitar Music, Pat K, Nancy Imhoff, Peta Carlin, Sarah MCAT, Angela Lazaire, Travis Dandro, Jane Bevan, Helena Fisher, MD, Tina Reynolds, Sacred Alpaca, Natasha P, Indy Loon, Susie Fetter, Via T, Linda Skull, Mehernush Amiri, Mari Garcia, D Fish, Energetics with J, Someone 77, Attunement Tarot, J.A., Carrie Affrenti, Mike, Cookerzilla, Lin Ching, Helena Kolyanak, Kiska Kuznetsova, Linda Osborne, Denise Gould, Many Stars, E.F., Nina K., Zoe, Plamena Malinova, The Muslim Researcher, Dante Hill, Cameron Walker, Larissa F., A. Nyan, Marlo Murphy, Allison Arthurson, Janelle S., Natalia Yee, Danny C., Bonnie Harlan, Janet McCann, Gamine, CPT Alpha 12, Alina Bloomgarden, AC, Bryson Taylor, D. Polina 1, Mina Dobras, NG, Sydney, Rebecca Cortez, Pat Doty, Ricky Dandridge, Brandy Williams, Allison Elliott, Lisa Newcomb, Mason HKW, Rach Angel, Adya Freya Willow Raven, Psychics and Mediums, Nobody Important 7879, MA, Parakeets Ergo, Nat Catnip, Shane V, Jesse, Aaron Peterson, Shell Hawkins, Amanda Emmons, Brenda Tucker, This Is It, My Friend, Tracy Gerdine, Malcolm Sen, Sabrina Simon, JL, Grounded Fire, Shadow and Soul Tarot, Ethereal Material, Esther Swan, Theodora, Victoria Gordon, Corvus Cornix, Lizzie Willow, and Kim Spina. Thank you all again so much. Much love to you. And without any further ado, let's get into the sign by sign. All right, so for Aries, we have Neptune moving through your first house as it moves into Aries. So this is going to be a very significant transit for you coming up, probably the most significant of all of the changes of the outer planets, because it's in your first house. And this is the place of you yourself, how you show up, how you engage with the world, how you see yourself, how other people see you. It's basically that interface point between you, yourself, and who you are and the world. So very fundamental for you. It's likely that this Neptune is going to, in many different ways, wind up basically infusing your personality and your identity, your sense of self. So on the one hand, your identity is likely to become a lot more fluid, a lot more flexible. It's likely to feel like it is in flux. And what's interesting about that is that there is this visionary nature to Neptune, generally speaking. We can tend to look to Neptune or even venerate Neptune as having some kind of otherworldly understanding of things. And especially with others projecting onto you, which is something that we'll definitely go into here. I wouldn't be surprised if you find that people are coming to you more and more for answers and for guidance, for advice, basically for some sense of perspective on their own lives. And yet simultaneously for you to feel more up in the air, more like you have more questions than answers, and more like you yourself are kind of going with the flow and seeing how things wind up unfolding and remaining open for opportunities and possibilities and not locking in on any specific thing. And yet again, people looking to you as having some vision that they're maybe wanting to tap into. So it's likely to feel a bit bewildering at first, maybe a bit disorienting at first, as well as you start to get used to this Neptune moving through that house of yours. But this is also very likely to infuse your personality, your self-image with something Neptunian. So either with something very imaginative or creative or spiritual. It's likely that your personal goals are going to start to gravitate around these deeper interests of yours, that which goes beyond surface levels. And it may feel like you're getting really pulled in different directions. So magnetized towards certain opportunities and then pulled into these different topics or things like that. So this could be just feeling pulled towards some specific, let's say, craft or something like this. And you then wind up getting really, really, really into it. And then you wind up pursuing that either fully, like you make that your whole life and maybe even livelihood, or at least this being a sense of identity that you carry with you as this is who I am, this is what I do. And there may be shifts and changes that take place over time with this. That's one thing that I've personally found with Neptune quite a bit, is that it can feel like you're being drawn in one direction and then drawn in another and then drawn in another. And that is kind of the case. I mean, that is how we would interpret that. That is quite literally what we're seeing and what's going on. But when we try to get literal with Neptune, it can get kind of slippery. And the way that I've seen it play out quite often is that there is some broader vision in mind about what it is that Neptune is trying to bring to your personality, what it's trying to lead you toward as a fuller sense of yourself and a fuller sense of creative or spiritual or imaginative self-expression, or an openness to other people, or some increased level of compassion that you express to others or that you represent to others. And yet there are all sorts of helpful tidbits, helpful waypoints, helpful insights that are on these different paths that we may feel when we're being led down a specific path, or when we're getting magnetized in a specific direction. We may feel like, okay, well, this is the destination. Cool. But that is kind of just an assumption. And often we're not really dealing with the destination quite yet. So again, for instance, what did we say? Like a creative hobby or something like that, that winds up becoming a major part of your identity. It may be that, for instance, perhaps by the end of this, Neptune is really desiring to have you teaching how to clear yourself and approach creative mediums with like an open heart or something like this. I'm just kind of piling on some Neptunian concepts here. But in order to get to that point, there may be multiple mediums of crafts or whatever it is that you're needing to learn in order to get yourself to the point that you feel like you understand this well enough to, for instance, teach it in like within the coming 14 years or so that you have Neptune here. So it's like there's all these little different things that you would need to learn along the way to get yourself to that destination. But I think as human beings, we tend to look at Neptune as deceiving us because it leads us in these different directions that we assume are destinations, but they're not actually. So I think that's going to be pretty important to keep in mind for Aries, because this is going to be so personal and fundamental to you. Try not to assume that just because you're being led in a direction, that that's the destination. This is very much and enjoy the journey and learn as much as you can, pick up as much as you can along the way, and be grateful for all of the different things that you do wind up learning and that you do wind up kind of adding to your toolbox along the way. So like I said, others may project onto you quite a bit more than usual. So that is something to keep in mind. That can be both wonderful and very frustrating. So of course, I mean, it depends on who it is. Sometimes people project nice things onto us, and that is not good. But basically, this would be people creating an image or an ideal or a narrative around you, or even just they carry that narrative and they then see that evoked by you in them, right? So then they wind up projecting that image or that narrative, that story, that character onto you. And sometimes, and it's often confusing then, because you think that you are directly interacting with someone, but they're not actually interacting with you. They're interacting with what they are projecting onto you. So that can be very, very, very frustrating. And that is something, again, because this is in your first house, these little weird, wonky things that go on with Neptune, I think is going to be quite important to keep in mind, because there can be some signs of this. Again, if your connection with someone feels like, why do they not understand me at all? And why do I feel like I'm not even really talking to this person? Things like that can wind up cropping up when you are being subject to a lot of projection. So that can be people's fears, people's, in the Jungian sense, the anima or the animus, the rejected aspects of ourselves that we can sometimes project onto others so that we can take issue with it in a confrontational way rather than dealing with our own issues. This can also show up in the sense of imagining an ideal, for instance, partner, and having that vision or that image and then projecting it onto someone. And of course, when one does that, all that person can do is disappoint them ultimately. I mean, in pretty much most cases, it's kind of frustrating. But on the other hand, again, people will be seeing in you Neptune. That will be an energy that you're carrying, and that is in the interaction, that is infusing the interfacing of you with other people, right? I hope that makes sense. So that can be a bit foggy. This can also have you projecting onto other people at times as well, and being very, very, very idealistic about people and assuming things, probably assuming that people are like you. Yeah, I think so. I think that this would incline toward assuming that people are like you, which tends, I mean, I guess it depends on how you envision yourself as like good or bad. But I would imagine that the idealism of Neptune there is going to have you approaching the world more open than usual. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, Neptune also does tend to provide on some level, at least a silver lining or a usefulness to any sort of weird lessons that it winds up bringing our way too. So I wouldn't say to shut down to any of the opportunities or pathways that it opens to you. But again, just kind of keeping in mind, there is a lot of idealization going on. It's very much, I think, a two-way street for you in the coming 14 years or so. This also really reinforces the need for boundaries around yourself, your life, your image of yourself. So not allowing for people's projections to be something that you wind up internalizing. So the extent to which you can clarify to yourself ahead of time, maybe even by writing it down, what is and is not acceptable, just in terms of how people approach you or how people treat you or how people make you feel. And writing down those red flags of yours and those things that are acceptable or not in your view of other people's behavior towards you, perhaps even yours toward other people as well, so that you have that as something to anchor onto in those moments of unclarity or confusion, or am I seeing things correctly or am I not? And that can save you a lot of the downsides to this Neptune while still leaving you open for a lot of the upsides, which is a huge amount of opportunity. It's kind of like Jupiter on steroids. It's very weird. It's probably like Jupiter on a lot of substances. It's quite a transit to experience. It really opens you up. It brings in these weirdly serendipitous, synchronistic alignments that are absolutely perfect for you. Again, remember that these are probably not all destinations, but wonderful experiences to have to, again, add to your range of experience and your range of wisdom and perspective and understanding and joy, right? So this is really about reinventing who you are repeatedly throughout the coming 14 years or so, and doing so intuitively. Again, this is going to be speaking to you very directly, serendipitously, synchronistically. Pay attention to what's showing up for you. Pay attention to the repetitions, the patterns. Pay attention to what's popping into your mind out of nowhere. Pay attention to the weird ideas that you get. Pay attention to the creative impulses and things like this that wind up cropping up. Or again, especially the repetitive things or the insane opportunities that are like, where did that even wind up coming from? That is so on the nose and so perfect and so ridiculous, and where it's difficult to figure out where to provide credit. Neptune is often to credit for those crazy, like perfectly aligned moments that can wind up leading you down a completely different path than you ever would have expected. And what's cool about Neptune too is that it can lead you in directions that are actually going to be a lot better and more satisfying and more enjoyable and more meaningful for you than the ones that you would choose for yourself as well. So that's part of the reason too why I think it's really important to stay open and flexible with it, because it's able to see through everything. It's able to move through everything. Any sort of boundary that one could try to erect, Neptune will find a way through it. So there aren't really any limitations for you when Neptune is running through your first house there, especially any personal limitations or limitations upon your personal goals. But the key is to remain patient and flexible and open to the opportunities, and to not be too rigid about how you want things to show up, or when, or in what specific guise, or with what specific timeline around what specific destination that you have in mind, right? The manifestation practice of saying or something better, that's a lot of what Neptune winds up bringing, is when you're open to that or something better, often that's what you wind up getting. And often that's the kind of work that Neptune naturally does for us anyway. So yeah, I think that that's pretty much what I have for you, Aries. It's an absolutely wonderful transit. I'm going to keep talking about it here and there, especially in these first few years that we have Neptune there, and you're learning the ropes with it. None of us have ever had the Neptune transits that we're coming into now on a personal level. We've had them in the previous houses through different aspects, different time periods in our lives. And so I think it's going to be important to kind of come back to what that's doing. And I'm also going to go into Saturn in Aries here very shortly, a bit later in the month. And then I'm also going to go into Uranus and what it will start to do as it moves into Gemini again here shortly. So we're going to continue to talk about what these alignments are going to mean for all of us individually. So in the meantime, I hope that this all treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right. So for Taurus, we have Neptune in Aries transiting through your 12th house. And this is a pretty interesting house. It has to do with your subconscious, that which is outside of your conscious awareness. It also has a lot to do with isolation, time spent alone, places where you spend time alone, your private life. This can have a lot to do with your patterning, your emotions, your conditioning, your expectations, how you expect for things to go, and what's hidden for you. And so it's probably going to be quite quiet for a lot of this transit for you, but it's going to be working on your intuition and your subconscious quite a bit. So you may find yourself much, much, much more deeply spiritually connected in the coming 14 years. Your intuition is likely to be very, very heightened throughout this whole period of time. Your dreams are likely to contain a lot more potent or significant or salient information and experiences. You may find yourself like lucid dreaming even. And even just what's going on in your subconscious is likely to take on a bit of a dreamier aspect to it. So this can be your imagination getting worked up. This can be this kind of inspired, imaginative thoughts and notions that are creeping in. So you may find that you are working with what feels like a muse that's coming through and inspiring you. If you are a creative type, this is going to help a huge amount with that, to open you up to new possibilities, to kind of break down any preconceived notions around form or like the structure of your creativity, and to transcend maybe even like genres, or I'm not quite an artist, but styles or mediums or things like this. So breaking outside of the confines, or being kind of led beyond the confines, I should say, with Neptune, such that your work winds up becoming more and more and more inspired. This is also going to help a huge amount in terms of your intuition with any sort of divination or connecting to your higher self or meditation. Astral travel, past life regression is probably going to be a big one here too. The 12th house can directly speak to that which occurred before birth for you and what kind of material there is in there. So that may be something that you're interested in digging into. I would definitely recommend meditative and like yogic practices, things like this, where you're able to take care of your spiritual and emotional and psychological and physical health all at once and in a very gentle but active way. There's also going to be an increased need for solitude, to retreat, to spend time alone, to spend time in your imagination, maybe to daydream, maybe to just relax. And you'll probably also want to create something of a sanctuary or like a safe environment for you to just relax in, to just experience yourself and your life and to just be in and not be disturbed. and to create this kind of purified state there. You may also find yourself really desiring to purify your subconscious. So therapy would be great with this if that is at all of interest to you. But even if it's just like either psychoanalysis or again, meditation and allowing for thoughts or patterns or things like that to crop up as needed and to be released, this can help a lot also with putting you in touch with any sort of repressed memories or subconscious patterns that you haven't really thought of before. This is going to give you a different perspective on those and how you may be able to surrender and release those as well, or purify those. You may literally want to spend some time on retreats or going to these kind of like a silent retreat or something like this as well. But certainly you can do that on your own as well and do that fully in solitude. Now, as you are in that space, Neptune is likely to want to help. And so it does so in sometimes funky ways where you may find that there are some hidden fears that wind up arising. And I wouldn't say that purpose of those fears coming up is for you to feel them or give into them or surrender to them or anything like that, but rather to just be aware of them and to not run from them, to look at them, to maybe embrace them, to be compassionate toward your fears. Again, especially anything that's been patterned and it's been under the surface and you're kind of recognizing, oh, wow, that's a fear of mine that's been down there under the surface. And Neptune is also under the surface, and it just showed me this, that was under there, right? So sometimes Neptune can just pull things up from the deep, show it to us, and give us a choice as to whether we want to cover it back up again or whether we want to resolve it by surrendering that, letting it go. Now, having this in Aries as well, there may be something there about assertion or anger or something like this that it's working on because of the fact that you do with, especially if you have Taurus rising, with Aries in the 12th house, that may be something that you try to sweep aside, that you try to not experience, that you try to not look at. And with Neptune down there, with any sort of repressed anger or repressed frustration around assertion or resistance to assertion or hesitancy to assert yourself, again, these are likely to be the things that it crops up with and says, hey, did you know about this? What are we supposed to do with that thing that I just found, right? So it can help you to heal that, which is to say either to release these things or to look at them in a different way. So when it comes to assertion or anger, is that something that maybe you want to do differently? Neptune making this area more fluid is also going to help with you being able to redefine it in a way. And it is a rare opportunity that we get to actually tap into what's going on in the 12th house for us. So it is likely to be doing quite a bit of that work, bringing those things up, pointing them out to us. So very, very, very powerful time for any sort of personal healing work, especially around even your beliefs about things or your values or especially any sort of self-limiting beliefs. Again, if it's helpful to bring it up, Neptune's probably going to bring these things up. It may not be at the most convenient times, but remaining open to those things that it winds up showing you. And again, it's not always just about saying, yes, I accept that. Sometimes it'll bring something up and you'll be like, wow, I don't like that. So let's look at that differently and let's see if we can approach that in a different way. Again, if you are at all a creative type, this is specifically going to be speaking to you through your subconscious. So quieting down when you are doing your work, doing that kind of work in solitude. If you tend to do that in a group setting, solitude is going to help with that quite a bit as well, to tap you into not just your own imagination and intuition and things like that, but if you are literally an artist, this can also then help to tap you into the collective unconscious and enable you to speak to what a lot of people are feeling in a way that's going to resonate quite a bit with people as well, and is going to have a strong impact and influence on people. You may even find that this is encouraging you to take on a spiritual leadership role. So maybe this is like leading meditation or doing some kind of energy work or something like this as well. One thing I would kind of warn about with this, though, is Neptune can increase things quite a bit. That's one of the things that it does, is it dissolves the boundaries that hold things in or that limit things. So it creates a limitlessness to whatever it's touching. And when it's in the 12th house, there are some complicated things that can show up here. So for one thing, if there are chronic conditions that you have in terms of your health, they may get a little bit more confusing. I would try your best not to sweep that under the rug if there are new symptoms or things along these lines. Those new symptoms and so forth could also be Neptune trying to show you that there's a different aspect that you may have been overlooking. Maybe it can even be helpful in the long run, which Neptune typically is, to have something weird crop up, which maybe even calls into question an existing diagnosis. I'm not a doctor, but I'm just giving examples. Maybe it would even be something that would call into question an existing diagnosis and would actually wind up helping huge time in the long run, but through that confusion or through that mysterious new thing that winds up cropping up within an existing chronic condition. But this can also show up in terms of substances. Some people refer to the 12th house as the place of self-undoing. I tend to think that that's kind of extreme, but certainly all of the aspects in which we can do that tend to show up in the 12th house as well. So when it comes to substances, when it comes to unhealthy patterns, when it comes to the things that we can do to kind of subtly self-sabotage, that is also, there's an increased risk of that. So it's worth keeping tabs on that and actively applying limits to it, because Neptune won't do that. Neptune will allow for those kinds of things to get out of hand. It's not going to tell those habits and things like that no. So again, when it comes to substances and things like that, that may even have different effects on you than they usually do. Checking, for instance, even just when it comes to drinking, if you have a couple of drinks, it may have a different effect on you than a couple of drinks had on you prior. Just kind of, it's worth rechecking all of the impacts that these things have on you and getting a new kind of a baseline, and then keeping in mind that that baseline can continue to shift. Even if you feel like you've readjusted to Neptune being in that 12th house, it can always change too. So just being a little bit more careful with anything like that than you usually are. Additionally, this may draw you really into solitude. Trying not to over-idealize isolating, I think, would be another thing that would be worth kind of keeping in mind here, where it's so idealized to be on your own that you wind up losing touch with a lot of people that you do enjoy, but dealing with them may be certainly more complicated than not dealing with them. And Neptune can certainly then encourage, like, yeah, then why do that? Because it's more comfortable to not deal with people, right? I could also see something like that happening. So just a few things to kind of keep an eye open for. Any sort of difficult habits that you have, Neptune's likely to be a bit overindulgent to those things. So it's worth exercising somewhat more stringent boundaries with yourself, with Neptune in the 12th house there. But yeah, other than that, it's a great place, again, for creativity, for imagination, for intuition, for spiritual work, for energy work, for really enjoying your solitude, retreating, and being able to create a kind of sanctuary for yourself where you're able to just relax. So I would really lean into all of those aspects. And we'll also talk about these other placements that are going to be speaking to that again here quite shortly. So if that is something that you're interested in, definitely keep an eye open, because that's going to kind of enrich what's going on for us in the coming couple of years to have a more full understanding of all of this. But yeah, in the meantime, I hope that this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Gemini, we have Neptune in Aries transiting through your 11th house. So your 11th house has to do with your social groups that you belong to, your friends and benefactors, and social expectations that are placed upon you. It's basically your social role and your social milieu that you connect with, especially along the lines of career or purpose-oriented social connections, as well as aspirations, and especially social aspirations. So again, not only what are the social roles that you're in, but what are the social roles that you would like to have as well. So what is it that you're striving for? So there's likely to be a lot more fluidity in this area now. There can be an increased idealism. There can be like among your friends or around your friendships. So you may be idealizing community connections, like desiring to have them more, desiring to connect more, desiring to feel like you belong. But this can also be idealism around that, as in that you're connecting with more and more idealistic people, where there's a social cause or there's a belief system or there is some common thread of belief that runs through those social connections that you're establishing. And again, this can be friendships, it can be community, it can be professional groups, it can be just social groups that you hang out with, that you spend time with. This can even be the circles that you kind of run in and engage with and things like that. So even the events that you go to, there's likely to be a lot more discussion about beliefs and about ideals and about what you're striving for, what you're reaching for, what you're hoping for. There can be this kind of dreamy, optimistic bent as well to Neptune that I would not be surprised if that winds up coming in with those that you're connecting with more often now, which is nice. You'll probably feel more hopeful about community connections and social connections as well, more excited about them, and more confident that you're actually going to connect with people that feel very much aligned to you or feel like they're going to support you or understand you. So yeah, you can definitely be drawn to some spiritual or visionary or activist or community-oriented, like community cause-oriented groups of people or networks of people. So political groups or community groups, church groups, even when it comes to like entrepreneurism within your field, or people who believe in pushing the field that you're in a new direction. Or this can even be like more idealistic circles that are just like socially or creatively based. So different scenes basically would be a way of speaking to that are a bit more idealistic or more creative. This could be around like genres or certain creative activities. For instance, if you are an artist of any sort, this would be like running in circles of artists and connecting with them more. Even if you're not, you're more likely to be drawn to artists and activists and visionaries and things like that. So even if you are not playing a part in that, in and of itself, in that activity, which I would kind of expect that you would be, or that you would be drawn into it, you're likely to be surrounded by those kinds of people, these Neptunian people, a lot more. But even when it comes to your social ideals, like your beliefs about society and how that should function, that's also really going to get stirred up by this Neptune being there. So I wouldn't be surprised, even if you're not very socially oriented as in society and how it's functioning and different causes and things like that. I would not be surprised if that's something that kicks up as a major interest of yours during this upcoming 14 years in a very strong way. Now, there is also a bit of a risk of some blurred boundaries here. There can be like things can seep between boundaries. So even if you feel like you have pretty strong boundaries, Neptune can definitely test them a bit by just having influence be a little bit more subtle. So for instance, let's say that you did wind up getting involved in some sort of social cause oriented group or an activist group or something like this. That could wind up taking over a lot of your life. It could wind up flooding out a lot of different aspects of your personality or your sense of self with the social expectation that you're going to fit that mold, right? And that's going to become a big part of who you are and your personality. Or you could wind up involved in some groups with people who are subtly pretty domineering and wind up either taking up a lot of cycles for you where you're needing to think things through or you're stressing about things or whatever, or they're just kind of pushing your buttons a little bit, things like that. So I would just kind of pay attention to what are these social connections that you have. How is your experience with them going? Are you getting really all in on certain things? That doesn't always have to be a bad thing, but it's always pretty good to check in and make sure that you're not overextending yourself too much as well. So I would definitely recommend that. Another thing I would just throw out there, and this is just going to be a one-off, and it's probably going to happen for very, very, very few of the Gemini people, but there could be even like a deceptive group of people that you would want to watch out for, and they may make themselves look very, very, very idealistic. What I'm saying is like a little bit culty. You might want to also look for those kinds of warning signs, or cults of personality, or again, like groups that are centered around either a person or like people who center themselves in these kinds of things. I would watch out for them a little bit more than usual in the coming several years. Now, there is also a risk of disillusionment with friends or with your social goals and so forth. So this is likely to happen a couple times throughout the coming 14 years or so. This may also be front-ended to where those that you're connected with right now might not, on the whole, be coming with you with what Neptune is trying to draw you in toward or trying to introduce you to. So there may be some disillusionment that comes up initially that winds up clearing out some connections or redefining some connections. But there may also be some groups, for instance, that you're drawn into while Neptune is here that, again, kind of like if there was something that was centered around someone and you wind up discovering like, this isn't as cause oriented as I thought it was. It seems to be a little bit more oriented toward maybe someone's ego or something like that. And you're disillusioned and you just kind of step back from that and divest from that or redefine your connection, maybe even to that cause, generally speaking. There's likely to be these little moments like that crop up that are probably going to be quite ripe with lessons and greater understanding of who you are and what you really believe in and what you want to get involved in and things like this. So if those things do come up, if you can remember, just try to tap into, there's something, a Neptunian lesson in that should be really valuable, and looking for that, I think, would be really nice to not get into then disappointment and being demoralized by that, because Neptune's always going to be bringing in, or it's always going to have on offer as it's going through your 11th house, the ability to connect with new groups of people. So kind of keeping yourself open, I think, is going to be quite nice in order to be able to expand socially as much as you would like throughout this period of time. Additionally, this can have you carrying a subtle or inspirational kind of leadership quality to you. So this could also have you in a leadership role. I would be very mindful of the fact that the little things that you do can have an impact on people in ways that they're not even really consciously aware of. So trying to be gentle, trying to be compassionate, trying to be really kind in how you're leading people and taking those roles very, very seriously. And basically treating a leadership role as somewhat sacred, the influence that you have on other people. You may also be inspired by leaders, by people who are stepping out and people who are being quite courageous or really leaning into their belief or are really having a big impact on you and, again, what it is that you're wanting to get involved in as well. And finally, the serendipity, synchronicity aspect of this is likely to be really loud and very weird and very cool. So this is a very nice house, the 11th house. It's all of our like social connections. It's how we connect with society. It's what we believe in when it comes to the world, etc. And our place in it. And so you're likely to serendipitously find your way into certain circles and certain causes and certain opportunities and things like this, certain positions and roles and notions of yourself and notions of what's possible for you and so forth. So again, staying open to the weird ways in which you meet people and trying to pay attention to that, and also following your intuition when it comes to events and opportunities to socialize. If you feel for some reason on a gut level like you should go somewhere, I would recommend following that. It's likely that there's going to be some weird meeting there of someone that has a big impact on you. And it may not be necessarily an A to be kind of a thing. It may be that you are meeting someone who's going to introduce you to a group of people, and maybe that group of people isn't even the final thing that Neptune's trying to lead you toward, but rather an individual within that, or maybe there's something a little bit different than that group that you're wanting to do, and maybe that's something that you wind up creating or founding or pushing toward, initiating, basically. So yeah, pay attention to who is introducing themselves to you. Try and stay open to social connections. That's where there's going to be a huge amount of opportunity for you. Paying attention also to the fact that you're likely to have more influence over other people, and that you can really inspire people during this period of time as well. Again, this is going to be ongoing for like 14 years. Yeah, trying not to let those little moments where maybe someone is a bit deceptive, or maybe someone doesn't quite know what they believe, or maybe they are confused, or maybe they have a weird kind of an ego boundary issue or something like this as well. Try not to let those little experiences that I'm sure are going to crop up here and there with Neptune in the 11th house, try not to let those get in the way of you being and remaining open to connections with other people. Because the good is definitely going to wind up outpacing the complicated here, right? But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Gemini. So I really hope that this transit treats you well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Cancer, we have Neptune in Aries transiting through your 10th house. And your 10th house has to do with your reputation, your legacy, your ambitions. And if you're following a traditional career path, it tends to speak to your career. This is your public life and what you're known for in your public life. So that is going to become somewhat more fluid throughout the coming 14 years or so. Let me just assuage off the bat any sort of major concerns or anything like that. I have Gemini rising, so this is just now going to be moving out of my 10th house. And it's not that it causes things to be super confusing. It's not that it winds up dissolving your career or anything like that. But basically what Neptune winds up doing as it's moving through a specific area is that it increases the significance of idealization, of whether something is ideal, whether something feels right, whether something feels good. And it also leads us in these kind of non-linear ways. So Neptune isn't necessarily going to tell us off the bat, hey, by the end of this 14-year cycle here, we are going to have you doing this specific kind of a job. And I'm just going to tell you this off the bat. Now, usually what it'll wind up doing is leading you there over time and through different paths, through a somewhat wandering path. So in terms of your career path, it is going to become more path-like. It's going to become more of stepping in this way and then that way, and often very serendipitously, often very synchronistically. You may be kind of blown away by the doors that wind up opening. And I would also say that remaining optimistic and remaining hopeful and remaining open to opportunity is also really helpful for getting the best out of a Neptune transit. So you're likely to really desire that your career path is going to be deeply meaningful to you. It may feel more and more frustrating to follow a path that isn't meaningful to you, that doesn't contribute in some sense to your beliefs or doesn't reflect your beliefs, or isn't strongly contributing to the kind of lifestyle and the kind of role that you're wanting to experience in this life. So becoming who you want to be and contributing to what you desire to, it's just going to become a lot more important to you throughout this period of time. So as far as what your public image is, that can also become a bit confusing or idealized. The impact that you want to have on the world or those around you, that's very likely to be expanded through this period of time. Again, the meaning of that, the significance of that is reinforced by Neptune being in this place. But it does require kind of staying open. So trying not to be too rigid about what role you're wanting to play, but rather maybe focusing on, if you are a creative type, maybe it's not, oh, I want to be in this specific job at this specific company. Maybe there's something even better for you, but it's going to take maybe even receiving that job in that company or something like this, but then becoming a bit disillusioned with it and not being as into it as you may expect, and then having an opportunity to go in a different direction and following that, and then ultimately ending up in a place that's, again, a lot better probably, and much better suited certainly than what you set out for. But again, I think that a lot of the frustration that we can feel with Neptune is that we wind up assuming that the direction that we're being led in is going to be the be all and end all, that it's the destination, and it almost never is. It's usually just a stepping stone to something a lot better, and maybe even quite significantly different. I mean, just to use my example, I was studying astrology for my whole life, and started to kind of go in that direction when I was a teenager, but wound up going more so in an academic direction because I wanted to be a journalist, and I did become a journalist, and wound up getting dream job situations and so forth, but wound up being very disillusioned by the field and by the way that it was run, and by the world, and the fact that people aren't really open to journalism anyway. They just kind of have their minds made up, etc. And so I wound up stepping out of that, but I wound up then circling back to astrology. That was, one of the early things that I was interested in pursuing. But what's fascinating is that I would not have imagined when I was a teenager, before YouTube existed, that I would be going in a direction that would also include media. And I also did not think that that was going to be the case when it came to my journalism. But I wound up getting media training because my journalism wound up leading me to broadcast investigative journalism. And so I had some experience with that, made me a little bit more comfortable with putting my voice out there and organizing video and things like this. So I hope that makes sense in terms of there was definitely a component of, one, showing me that I could do that in journalism, that I could have that if I wanted it, but also then teaching me the media aspect so that I could come back around to something else that I really loved as well, and that feels a lot better aligned. Also because I am a lot more conflict averse than I used to be, so I don't really want to have to deal with the whole political stuff all the time. So I hope that makes sense in terms of, that's just one example. And this tends to be the case where it'll lead you down these different kinds of paths that may wind up bringing you full circle even, but you may assume, oh, this is the dream situation, I'm all in on this. And then when you get a little bit disillusioned with it, we can wind up then blaming Neptune for that. But what it did was it opened a really wonderful door, and what it's going to do is continue to open those really wonderful doors. So trying not to let disillusionment or the nudges that we get from Neptune to shift our path to be demoralizing at all. It's a very rewarding, enjoy the journey kind of teacher, Neptune is. So I would definitely recommend looking at it from that direction. Now, with Neptune in Aries in your 10th house, this can also certainly lead you into some leadership positions, and especially compassionate leadership positions, or understanding how to influence people in a way that is sensitive, that is considerate, that is probably not super hierarchical in the way that you approach that. And that may also be a pretty significant component that winds up coming in through this for you, even if it's not in your career, but in the way in which you lead people. It's becoming more sensitive. It's becoming possibly even more creative as well. So certainly if you are a creative type, this is going to be really weirdly helpful on a lot of different levels. For one thing, that is one of the major purviews of Neptune. And so opening doors along those lines is going to be pretty straightforward for Neptune to do. But you may find yourself then teaching that or mentoring people along those lines or leading in some way. Even if you're not in a creative field, this can also be a really strong appreciation and a knack for being able to engage and get the best out of the creative talents of people that either work for you or work on your team, etc., or being able to apply your own creative talents in any given field as well. This could also have you pulled in different directions that's ultimately going to lead to you being independent and possibly working for yourself, especially if that's something that you idealize at all. If that's something that you would desire to have with this in Aries, it can wind up leading to a lot of independence and basically working for yourself, and therefore wearing a whole bunch of different hats. And one of those interesting things with Neptune leading us down different paths and teaching us these different things that we're able to hold on to, you could wind up learning a lot of the different tools that you would need in order to go independent and fill a whole lot of roles then. One thing that's likely to be interesting with this alignment is if you have an authority figure in your working environment, or if you're answering to an authority figure, that may feel very unclear. So they may be kind of confused. They may need a lot of help in terms of organizing themselves and their thoughts. They may seem a bit like a mess. They may be confusing in terms of showing up in very different ways from day to day as well. So someone may seem like a friend one day and then be weirdly domineering on another day or something like this. There can just be kind of confusion around those authority roles and how those people are going to wind up showing up. And you may even wind up being put into a position where you're not quite sure how you want to exercise authority around that too. I mean, this could even show up as boss or an authority figure that is having you keep them on task, even where there's a major confusion about what people's roles are. So that may also require some flexibility. But ultimately, this is going to be about realigning yourself, redefining what does success mean to you. Does it look like making a lot of money? Does it look like living with purpose? Does it look like having the freedom to be able to run your life in whichever way you're wanting to run it, or to make your own schedule, or to call your own shots, or things like that? Like, what does success look like to you? What is it that you're trying to create of yourself and your talents in this life? Who is it that you're wanting to be, and what is it that you're wanting to be known for? What kind of contribution are you wanting to make? So realigning that and redefining that, it's going to be an ongoing process, but you're probably always going to be in a place of having kind of redefined that. So you should always basically know what you're driving at, what you're trying to push toward in that given moment. And I wouldn't be shy to lean on that intuitive understanding of, this is what success looks like to me right now. And even if that winds up shifting down the road, you will have followed the correct paths if you're really following your intuition with Neptune there, such that you wind up landing somewhere that does feel quite purposeful and does feel like it winds up checking a lot of those boxes. One thing with Neptune is that part of the thing with it introducing a lot of different experiences is that it can show you the pros and cons of a lot of different things. And it can show you what, I wouldn't say like it's a be careful what you wish for kind of a thing, but in an extreme situation, you could maybe refer to it in that way of, it may give you exactly what you want, and you may realize that you don't actually want that. Now, the cool thing about it is that it doesn't stop there. It will continue to lead you, as Neptune does. It will continue to magnetize you toward that which feels better aligned with you in that given moment. But it's not just that you're shifting gears, that you're changing what you're aiming at. It's that you are compiling experience, and with more and more experience and a greater and greater understanding of what it is that you want, it makes it easier then for you to recognize and be open to the kinds of opportunities that are going to be more and more and more aligned with what you ultimately wind up settling in on. So yeah, I have to say, there were moments where this transit was weird for me personally, as I've had it over the past 14 years or so. It's my entire career. I've had Neptune transiting through my 10th house. And yeah, there were weird moments, but there were also the most insane synchronicities and serendipitous moments that wound up opening doors that I would have expected to be like 10 years down the line. It's, I think, a wonderful transit. I certainly would not have traded it for a it happening at any different time in my life than right smack in the middle of me trying to figure out, my career and everything like that. But yeah, I would just say, like, stay open to opportunities because they will fall in your lap at different times, and they will get better and better and better as you experience more and more and more and are clearer and clearer on what it is that you're truly wanting and what it is that truly fits for you, the contribution that you're truly wanting to make in the world. So yeah, I hope that this transit treats you super well. We're going to continue to look into all of these different alignments that are coming up. So stay tuned if that is something of interest to you. And yeah, other than that, thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Leo, we have Neptune in Aries transiting through your 9th house. And this is one of the cooler alignments here. You've got a pretty neat setup. The reason for that is that the 9th house has to do with our worldview, our range of experience, and our potential, our horizons, expanding our horizons. This can literally have to do with higher education or courses, learning, teaching, publishing. There can be aspects of legal considerations here. There's also travel and foreign places, foreign connections that show up here. And this is also a place of belief. So spirituality can show up here. And the cool thing about that is that this is all getting expanded on. It's also becoming somewhat more fluid. But this is generally an area of life that responds well to that kind of thing. So your beliefs about yourself, your possibilities, your potential, the world, your place in the world, spirituality, politics, all of this, culture, all of these things are becoming more fluid. They're becoming more flexible, which can be really helpful in expanding your range of understanding and your sense of deepening and deepening and deepening your understanding and clarifying things. So you're likely to be pulled down multiple different kinds of paths when it comes to learning about and deepening your sense of, again, understanding of the world and yourself and your place in it and your connections and so forth. So I'll give an example of how Neptune tends to work along these lines that I think should be pretty clear. When it comes to your worldview, the 9th house has a lot to do with philosophy. And Neptune, the way that it impacts us is that it tends to magnetize us towards certain things that are really well aligned for us and that are really fascinating and that can really open us up and cause us to transcend whatever limitations we feel like have already been placed upon us or maybe we have placed upon ourselves. And so one example of this, that kind of wandering path that Neptune can lead us down, it's very indirect. And so it's not just going to lead us directly to the destination. It very much believes that, the beauty is in the journey, right? To enjoy the journey. And so it will tend to magnetize us towards something and then utilize that as a launch pad to magnetize us towards something else and then utilize that as a launch pad for a different direction. And what it's trying to do is, again, open up and broaden that range of experience even all along the way to what it's trying to lead us toward. And therefore, by the time we get there, again, that range of experience is just massive by that point. And there's so much underlying that. There's a richness of understanding that's underpinning what it is that we're ultimately connecting to and that it's ultimately leading us toward. So the 9th house has a really easy example that I can reach to, which would be like philosophy. Maybe there is a specific kind of obscure, even philosopher that you're ultimately going to get way into. And that's just going to be perfectly aligned with you such that you're able to come back to this time and time again to understand yourself better, to understand the world better, your place in it, and your philosophy toward life and connection and so forth. But maybe it will lead you down that path to that philosopher by leading you into maybe it's Kant or someone like this. And then you're wanting to understand, okay, how did these ideas wind up developing a little further? Maybe you wind up getting into Hegel and you're in this kind of idealist philosophy world. And then maybe you go toward a more materialist direction, which Marx wound up then building upon Hegel's ideas as well. And then maybe you are saying, you know what, this is a little bit dry for me. I am kind of more idealistic than this. And maybe you wind up then going toward Marcuse or some of the other like humanist philosophers of the mid 20th century or something like that. And basically what you're doing is like you're thoroughly understanding the field at that point, and you're able to not just rely upon idealism in and of itself and the importance of ideas and the importance of a deeper understanding of yourself and your role and the roles of others in the world and how change happens historically, etc. But maybe you're then able to check that against what would a materialist say about this? So you're able to then stress test some of these ideas that you may have about the world and even integrate these things in a deeper way. So for instance, someone who was going to become a philosopher, maybe in a big way, if they were to have a Neptune transit through their ninth house, I would 100% expect for them to go through an experience very much like that. Now, this can also be on a less like political philosophy kind of a way. This can also be very spiritual. So maybe this is leading you toward Zen Buddhism and then toward like Vajrayana Buddhism and then maybe toward a more non-denominational perspective on all of that, you know? So there's this kind of wandering path that's broadening and broadening. You're putting more and more and more into that like knapsack of experience of yours. So that's super cool. It's broadening the living heck out of your mind, basically. This is a place of your higher mind. So I would expect for you to be really fascinated by just learning all of these different things. I do tend to find that the ninth house, it tends to be very much humanities oriented. It's very much about the world and beliefs and philosophy and things like that. So it would probably be somehow along those lines of the way that the world works and your ideas about that becoming more and more and more enriched. So this can, on a literal level, have you taking courses along these lines or getting really into different books along these lines as well. And you're very likely to feel drawn toward these topics and experiences that I've mentioned. So mysticism, spirituality, philosophy. You may even find yourself on some kind of a pilgrimage here. And I know that this sounds kind of strange, but we do this in a modern sense quite a bit. I mean, there's literally the Hajj that goes on every year, but this can also speak to, for instance, maybe there's a place in the world that you've always felt kind of drawn to. And maybe this is you taking some time out and actually going and visiting and witnessing all of these different things or places that you've been really fascinated by. Maybe this has something to do with your heritage as well. And maybe through that experience, you wind up learning a lot more about who you are or who you see yourself as and your beliefs about the world. And so you have kind of gone on a pilgrimage. You have gone to a place of spiritual and emotional significance to you, and you have reinforced or expanded your sense of the world and your sense of your place in it as well. And that can even be a wandering path too. So for instance, say you're moving somewhere else, which that may be the case, moving far away. That may not be the ultimate destination that you're being drawn toward. There may be somewhere else that is actually going to be where you wind up settling down, but experiencing that place is for some reason important for you to be able to enjoy and understand where it is that you're going to wind up landing a lot better. And maybe that's going to be back home. One thing I tend to recommend when it comes to Neptune is to try not to let human assumptions get too much in the way of allowing for it to do its work. So I think that a lot of the rougher reputation that Neptune can get is, oh, it's deceptive, because it'll wind up leading you down this path that it winds up being nothing. It's like, well, it's not so much that that's the case. It's that there was an assumption made somewhere along the line that it was leading you directly to a destination, which Neptune doesn't do. But we can tend to assume, oh, I'm finally getting this opportunity to move to this city, maybe in a different country, that I always kind of dreamed of, but now I'm moving there, and clearly that was always destined. It was always meant to be. But that's kind of an assumption. Neptune may be leading you there for a different reason. It may be leading you there as an educational pit stop along the way, right? So never dealing with Neptune as being literal, I think is generally the way to go with it, because it's usually not. So being open to the possibilities and trying not to get too locked in on any one thing that it's bringing to your attention. So again, even when it comes to philosophy, but yeah, even these serendipitous kinds of topics. So it doesn't have to be like philosophy or spirituality or anything like that. Again, all humanities certainly, I say, is in the ninth house, but it can be even broader than that. Anything really that is impacting your worldview and your sense of who you are in the world and what you can be. Neptune is going to expand the heck out of that. So this could even be hopping from accounting to economics or something like that as well. Also, I will just throw in here, because I don't have it written here and I don't want to forget, sometimes I do. Sometimes legal questions can come up in the ninth house. And I would say that with Neptune there, it will be important if there's any legal stuff going on, which there pretty much always is. We're always kind of in contracts and things like that. But certainly if something winds up in a court or there's an arbitration or something that goes on, making sure that you're as clear as you possibly can be on that is going to be really important. There can be things that we wind up overlooking or that we're confused about, can feel frustrating with Neptune involved. And especially with the way that that is tied into Pluto being in your seventh house. The seventh house can have to do with other parties in a legal situation. So I would, if you are at all having anything to do with courts or arbitration, I would make sure that you're not half-assing it, that you are as clear as you possibly can be, that there's no deception on your part of any of that, and that you have someone really solid on your side if that is a relevant part of that at all. Now, this can also wind up leading you down a path that will ultimately have you teaching too, or preaching potentially as well. So I would say remaining open to those opportunities, those possibilities. You may find that that is something that you really love, and a place where you're able to have a lot of really excellent influence on people, as well as by teaching your knowledge, by disseminating your knowledge, also publishing. This doesn't just have to be teaching in a classroom context, but teaching your ideas or publishing or putting out there your ideas for other people, especially if it has anything to do with philosophy or humility or sensitivity to others, compassion, any sort of belief systems and things like that as well. But always trying to make sure that you are grounding yourself when it comes to this. This can get really up in the air is the only thing. If we're over expanding, if we're getting a little too out there, try to make sure that you're coming back and grounding your ideas, grounding your beliefs. Like I said, with that example of the different philosophies and having the kind of competing aspects there, where the good thing about that, even if you know that you don't believe in a specific philosophy or whatever it is, it can help to have that competing idea clear in your head so that you're able to check yourself and check your ideas. But on the other hand, you are likely to be drawn into these kinds of missions and experiences where you will be able to have a pretty strong influence on other people and their ideas and their beliefs as well. So yeah, I would stay as open as you can to your intuition, to any sort of spiritual, intuitive hits that you wind up getting with regard to your future path and what's a possibility for you and what you're reaching for. Because this is a very cool transit to be experiencing. This is one of the somewhat less potentially complicated or harmful places for Neptune to be, and to have the most expansive of all of the different planets transiting through the house of expansion for you. There's really no limit here, which is pretty cool. So yeah, with that said, I'm going to go a bit more into all of these different transits that I have laid out here. These are the outer planets and what they're going to be doing here shortly. And I'll be going through different aspects of this as well. Saturn's involvement, Uranus's involvement. There's a lot more that we'll be digging into and building up with all of this. So if that's of interest to you, definitely feel free to keep your eyes open for that. But in the meantime, I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Virgo, we have Neptune in Aries transiting through your 8th house. And this is a very interesting, kind of funky house. So it has a lot to do with your connections to other people and the content of that. So The standard read of this is, quote, other people's resources or shared resources. To me, it's a lot deeper than that. It can have to do with the financial resources of those that you're connected to, but it can also have a lot to do with the emotional and psychological states and well-being and those kinds of, quote, resources in those that you're connected to, and the impact that that has from other people upon a connection or a commitment that you have with them. So this is a very psychological place, but it is also very spiritual and esoteric as well. So this can have to do with your spiritual connection to especially that which feels like it's outside of you. So not so much like higher self connection, but a spiritual connection to something that's beyond you. It can also have to do with esoteric things, as in what's kind of hidden and what you need to dig into. So research can even show up here quite a bit as well. So this is increasing your sensitivity, certainly, and especially your sensitivity to what's going on with other people. So big warning thing I'm going to do first. I'm going to handle that whole issue first, which is when it comes to the spiritual, emotional, psychological well-being or lack thereof of those that you are connected to, that is likely to have a stronger impact on you through this period of time, which is going to be about 14 years. So understanding the sensitivities that you have to other people, making sure that those boundaries are strong, that that's not impacting so much on a day-to-day level, at least, to where you're able to compartmentalize what's going on with other people a bit more. So for instance, I'll give you a concrete example of this. You may have a friend that tends to trauma dump on you quite a bit. And that has a huge impact on your own emotional well-being, your day, right? Does your day feel hopeful? Well, usually not after you've been trauma dumped onto, right? So the emotional and psychological well-being of other people can have a really profound impact on how you experience things. So keep in mind that you're going to be a bit more sensitive to those things, which can be a gift. And Neptune does usually come bearing gifts because of the fact that it's going to be more apparent to you when that's going on. But on the other hand, it can also have that seep in a bit deeper when it does. And so that's why it's more important when you have that Neptune there to make sure that those boundaries are pretty strong, because where they're not, it is likely to seep in. So that emotional, psychological sensitivity of you to other people, much greater during this period of time, much deeper, which can also lead to things like taking pity on people, which is a wonderful thing, but can also lead us to make greater sacrifices. That's another thing that can come through with the 8th house, is sacrificing some of our energy or some of our emotion and like emotional labor, especially to other people. And if they are not holding up their end of that, if they're not trying to heal, things like that, it can get complicated. I'm sure that you know this. So just checking in on that here and there. What are the emotional resources that you are offering up to other people? If there's any leakages there, this can even show up as like being the work counselor, like unofficial work counselor, right? So people coming to you to complain, and that has a big impact on your experience of work. So trying to find those sensitive, compassionate Neptune ways of establishing those boundaries a little bit more directly, so that people don't feel, maybe even gray rocking a bit, so that people don't feel as satisfied coming to you and doing that as well. Or just being totally direct about it. Maybe you can do that too. I tend to be a little bit soft about this. I'm a Pisces. I try not to say jerky things, or it can be really difficult. I think this is the case with Virgo for sure as well. It can be difficult to just be like, hey, you know what? I'm feeling like you're kind of being a bit of a downer and you're kind of killing my buzz for the day that I've put a lot of energy and effort into trying to maintain. So maybe don't do that. If you're able to do that, that's excellent. That's super wonderful. If not, then finding those little subtle ways of getting that across without feeling like you're being jerky about it. That's really excellent to have on hand throughout the coming years as you have Neptune going through this place. Now, the other aspect of how this is a gift, you can definitely know what's going on with other people in them without them knowing. That can therefore help you to avoid certain complicated situations. That can also help you to help other people. you're likely to be able to give some really excellent advice, which again, keep in mind, that's probably going to encourage people to come to you for that advice a little bit more. But when it comes to psychological dynamics or emotional dynamics that other people are going through, it's likely that you'll be able to see that and understand that more readily with this transit going on as well. So with that said, I think we get into the bit of the more fun aspect of this here. Now, when it comes to dependencies and vulnerabilities, things like this, you are likely to find that there are people that you can, to some extent, rely on, at least emotionally, to be a sounding board or to connect with, to talk to. Again, trying to make sure that that's a two-way street, trying to make sure that any dependencies are mutually beneficial. So there can be the development of some rather ideal interdependencies rather than just the codependencies that can crop up. But there may also be a little bit of confusion there. You may feel like, well, because of the fact that I know I can't really control how things are going to go with other people, I don't really want to be overly dependent on others, but I would like to just be able to develop some ideal trust with other people and just leave it at that. Right. So that kind of healing the way that you connect with people on a deeper level, or healing the way that you are vulnerable with other people, Neptune can help with that a huge amount. And confusion around these things isn't always a bad thing. Again, we can't always know exactly what people are going to do in the future. So when it comes to depending on others, it's almost impossible to know for sure that that's going to be a good and wise decision. But the extent to which you can root a lot of that dependency aspect of that in yourself, and then therefore, because you're quite self-reliant and you know that you're going to be fine and good regardless, especially having had Saturn and Neptune just go through your 7th house, you've probably had a lot of these experiences that have pointed these things out to you. So you've probably learned a lot about maybe rely on yourself a little bit more. This can then open you up to trust because you're not as dependent on that trust. I hope that makes sense. Being able to be vulnerable because of the fact that there's not as much of a need to be able to depend on that. Again, I really hope that I'm making sense here. It makes sense in my head, but I don't quite know how to articulate it better than that. Of course, Neptune challenging my ability to actually articulate what it's doing. But yeah, again, when it comes to those energetic exchanges, just making sure that they feel right. Do you feel better when you connect with someone? Do you feel drained? That is going to be a really wonderful barometer by which to go off of with Neptune here. And again, it's going to make that barometer more sensitive to these things. So it's going to be more difficult to sweep that kind of stuff under the rug, at least for very long. Now, does that look like you getting a lot more drained by the unhealthy connections? Yeah, unfortunately, but then you're able to establish those, fix, build up, put some spackle or whatever, reinforce the little parts of those boundaries that need that reinforcement. Now, on a spiritual level, on a more esoteric level, this is quite cool. Full disclosure, I have a Saturn-Neptune conjunction in my natal 8th house, so I kind of permanently have this as a transit. And it does tend to show up, one, when it comes to building up ideal situations and dreams and things like this. It does help with some spiritual trust along those lines of kind of giving it up to God in a weird kind of way, like saying, well, this and this and this seems kind of ideal. Maybe I will just note that for myself. Maybe I'll write it down and we'll see if it winds up coming through. If it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And weirdly enough, knock on wood, but those things do tend to wind up coming through, and often a lot better than I am setting out or that I am expecting or that I'm wanting. So that kind of giving it up to God aspect of relying upon spiritual support, relying upon those spiritual connections outside of yourself to clear the paths and to show you the paths, and then to trust that you will know which ones are really excellent for you and that you'll remain open to those. So that's one thing we can tend to rely on, especially if you're doing like smudging and you're making sure the energy is good and there's not weird connections coming through, things like that. That can help a lot in terms of, yeah, we may not be able to like control our connections with other people and fully depend on and rely on other people all the time, but we can connect to and rely upon our spiritual support system. And this is really excellent for developing that, for deepening those connections, for deepening that trust. Additionally, if there's something that you are kind of conjuring up as an idea, and then there's something but you can't quite evidence that yet, this can also help a lot with knowing where to look for those kinds of things. So knowing how to do the research to find the information that is there, Neptune, but you're not quite able to evidence quite yet. So finding the right information, being led to find the right information in the right places. This helps a lot with divination. Some of what I've been describing can definitely apply in just looking for answers in tarot or in prayer or in astrology even. If that's something that you are interested in, you've got a lot of cool alignments for something like that. Again, I'm an astrologer and I have that alignment natally. I also have Pluto in my 6th house. So this could incline toward that direction if that's something that you're interested in. This Uranus that's going to be transiting through your 10th house in Gemini, no less, can also pull you in a direction like that. So you may even find that you are getting a lot deeper into those kinds of esoteric, kind of beyond the veil topics and considerations. I'm trying to think of what else here. Other kinds of research as well. These alignments are all really supportive of getting really good at research and getting really good at digging into things and understanding things much like deep below the surface. Neptune is very indirect, and so it can help a lot with subtle or indirect intuitive information that you pick up on from outside of yourself. With the 8th house, it's always something to do with either other people or other groups of people or the world or something like this. And for some people, they're comfortable relying upon that. Again, I have my Saturn there with mine, so I always want to evidence something before I'm really going to rely upon it. And because of the fact that Saturn is there with it on the front end of this transit, I wouldn't be surprised if that's a big part of this, is those spiritual connections building up. But on the front end of it, especially for Virgo, which likes concrete evidence to be able to rely upon, Saturn helping you to be able to evidence these things to you ahead of time so that you feel more comfortable just relying on the gut feeling down the road when Saturn's no longer there with that Neptune. But that Neptune is still really increasing your intuition about the things that are going on outside of you. And finally, coming back to, I didn't quite mention this, the dissolving old traumas. This can also put you in a very sensitive way in touch with some things that have gone on with other people that you may have swept aside or kind of hand waved about and said, it's cool, I'm good. I don't really need to look at that anymore, and maybe even forgot about. So it can kind of subtly bring those things up or point those things out, point out any sort of relational patterns. Again, this just recently went through your 7th house, so some of this is going to sound familiar. But this can do that on a deeper level of actually correcting and healing some of those patterns. So again, I kind of characterized in the beginning of this that some people have probably been unreliable recently, and that you've probably learned a lot about boundaries. And that I would not be surprised if Neptune now moving into your 8th house, if that would be understanding now how to rebuild trust where you don't need to rely upon someone in order to have that trust. So any sort of old traumas that have broken trust, this can help to heal those things now and to actually look at the pattern and recognize that probably 80% of that pattern, it's not really on you. I mean, yeah, okay, maybe there's some codependency, maybe there was a little bit of overly openness to that. But if someone's been a jerk to you, that's kind of on them. It doesn't matter if someone's open and vulnerable or not. You should never be jerky to other people, right? So this can have you really forgiving yourself about that, understanding even on a deeper level, like the meaning of that and why that wound up taking place, things along those lines. So this can help a huge amount with healing any sort of more difficult experiences that you have had with people who were emotionally or psychologically or spiritually or karmically not the greatest, right? and helping you to release some of those things as well. But yeah, I think that is a lot of what I want to say about this time for you, Virgo. Like I said, I'm going to be looking into, I think I mentioned this, to Saturn in this place. I'm going to be looking into their connection to each other in this place again quite shortly. And so we're going to be talking about these alignments even more to try and flesh this out even more. So if that is something that you're interested in, keep an eye open for that. But in the meantime, yeah, I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Libra, we have Neptune and Aries transiting through your 7th house. So this is one of the more straightforward areas to have transits going on. It basically is going to speak to your partnerships, your relationships, and how you relate to other people. So this area is going to become a lot more fluid. It's going to become a lot more idealized and romanticized in various different ways. And there are different ways that tends to play out. So relationships can become idealized. So you can wind up at times putting people on a pedestal or very much romanticizing connections. This can have someone who tends to be very idealistic or romantic coming into your life as well, and infusing that into your life more, which can be really nice and wonderful. And there's definitely nothing wrong with that. Even people who are very spiritual or very creative, very imaginative, very artistic, very poetic, those kinds of people you can wind up connecting with more with Neptune transiting through your 7th house. But there can be a tendency to wear rose-colored glasses with people when Neptune is transiting through your 7th. So that can lead to some confusion. You may feel like you're not really sure where you stand with certain people. There can be difficulty defining things or difficulty knowing what your status is with someone as well. For instance, if you're dating, it can be difficult to know what level are we at here. Those definitions can feel elusive. And the experiences may be really wonderful. The highs may be very, very high, but it may also feel like a whirlwind. It may also feel, again, confusing. And one thing I would just kind of warn about with that is one of the reasons I think that Neptune can be a source of frustration for people is that it tends to open up paths for us. It tends to open up opportunities for us. And yet it's very indirect about what it's actually doing. And so I think that as human beings who try to define things, we tend to make assumptions about what the destination is that Neptune is trying to present to us. And so we can almost wind up deluding ourselves by making assumptions about what's going on in that area of our life. So for instance, this can be meeting someone who's really romantic and there's this kind of whirlwind romance and quickly deciding that, oh, this is someone that we want to marry and it's all just going to go swimmingly. And finally, this has come through. And yet, weirdly enough, Neptune may be, for one thing, showing us something about not wearing rose-colored glasses, not putting people on pedestals. And maybe there's something about boundaries or codependency that it's trying to point out as well. And maybe it is showing us that with this person because actually this person isn't really the one that we're supposed to settle down with, but maybe Neptune has someone else in mind down the road that it wants for us to be ready for. And so it's willing to sacrifice what would already have been a temporary situation in order to show us the lesson so we don't repeat that in the next thing. Because this is going to be ongoing for 14 years, so it's going to show up in different ways. Now, sometimes it can just show up as a wonderful, ideal partner that we can learn with and that we can experience life with, and we can follow a lot of those paths with. But the key is just being open and trying not to make too many assumptions, trying not to fill in too many gaps on our own. Which is to say, on some level, yes, not over-relying upon a partnership being something specific or meaning something specific, because we can't really control other people, and therefore controlling relationships or making assumptions about the direction of a relationship can be really, really fraught, as I think we've all experienced on some level or another. So I think that that's going to be a really critical aspect to this. Even if you're already married, you're already settled down, this can be other people in your life, other one-on-one connections. This can be business partners. This can be friends. This can be the partner that you're married to, becoming a little bit confusing, not really sure what's going on with them. They may be confused because Neptune can also show up as an embodied person when it's transiting, especially the seventh house. So this can be a partner that's a bit more up in the air and they're just not really sure what's going on and where they're headed. And they may need some assurance. They may need some structuring. They may need some guidance at different points. They may also be following these more spiritual or creative, imaginative paths themselves as well. So like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone coming into your life, but it can be someone who's in your life starting to follow that path and that having an impact then on your life. Maybe a really wonderful impact. Maybe, in fact, that's a big part of why you were supposed to have this person in your life, was so that they can start that path and then lead you down it as well. But again, there can be that elusiveness to partnerships and feeling a bit up in the air, which I think is something that if that goes on too long for people, that human beings tend to get kind of frustrated with. So if someone is really avoiding definitions, if you're really up in the air, if it's frustrating to you and yet it feels like, oh, this is so wonderful and romantic and it's so exciting, maybe just not relying too much on that, maybe just being open to the fun, being open to the excitement, but not feeling the need to depend on something by defining it or expecting that it's going to remain that way. And if that's something that's really important to you, if you are someone who's really wanting to settle down, then maybe that's kind of all of the answer that you need. If someone's not on the same page as you, try not to just sweep that aside, as we can do with ourselves. So trying, if you can, to get some clarity around commitments, about expectations, putting that into words, but then remembering that, again, we can't control other people. Sometimes people say words that sound really not elusive, that are right, thoroughly explained, thoroughly defined, completely understandable, and then they change their mind or something like this. So there's likely to be, I hate to say, some weird little lessons like that along the road here and there in the coming 14 years. And one thing I would definitely watch out for with that Neptune is any sort of projection. Now, that may come from either side. That may be you projecting onto other people projecting onto you. At different points, it's likely that this will be going on in either or both directions. And I do tend to find that, especially Libra Sun and Libra Rising, there does tend to be this assumption that others are as considerate of balance and equality in connections and giving as you are. So there is kind of a natural inclination to project your own goodwill onto other people there. And there's usually all sorts of lessons. I'm sure that you know this. I'm not telling you anything new. But yes, there's a little bit of an increased risk of that when Neptune is in that seventh house there. So if that's something you still find yourself doing here and there, rather than allowing for people to show you who they are and believing them when they show that to you, but rather trying to be very, very generous with others and give them lots of chances. Try to really internalize that lesson. I'm sure that you've had experiences with that before. Try to really make permanent and almost something that you check every relationship against with this going on, with this transit going on. And then therefore learning how to assert yourself, how to claim that Aries that's out in that seventh house of yours, learning to assert that compassionately and in a way that doesn't make you feel uncomfortable, that doesn't feel super confrontational. Because I think that that's mostly what Libra tends to try to avoid, is that sense, that feeling of conflict. But there are ways to assert your boundaries compassionately and without being conflictual about it. And if you'll forgive me just pointing out one more thing, if you are gently asserting your boundaries and it leads to conflict from someone else, then that, I think, is also kind of all of the information that you need about that connection too. So yeah, ultimately this Neptune is going to be about dissolving the old relationship patterns, but also the old relationship assumptions. Relationships and partnerships can be so much more wonderful, probably, than you've experienced up until this point. Again, if you are in a partnership that's pretty solid, I would expect for this to be reinforcing a lot of that and to be bringing that relationship into a greater and greater understanding and compassion with each other. and a greater sense of, in a more transcendent way, being able to rely upon each other. But that is going to be up to these questions around how you relate to other people. Do you do so in a self-sacrificial way? You may even be more inclined to when Neptune is transiting through this house. But if that's the case, it is trying to show you something about how you don't have to do that in order to have an ideal connection. And if you are doing that, then the connection probably isn't really ideal anyway. So yeah, I would just really encourage that your connections, your relationships, your partnerships, they should feel good to you. They should feel that they are compassionate to you. They should feel like you are understood and like you understand what the connection is and what it means to you, and even beyond words and labels and things like this. But when it comes down to that, of course, there's always the question of, is the other person right? And Neptune is likely to indirectly show you ways of measuring that go beyond just what people say and what they do in the moment, but is a little bit broader. So there may even be some interest in like psychology and the subtleties of psychology that wind up cropping up for you, that wind up being quite fascinating to you around this period of time, that you may not even need to study, but that just kind of comes through your intuition. That's another thing, is I would really trust your gut when it comes to other people. Even in partnerships, like business partnerships and things like this, with Neptune, there can be some deception even. And the way that comes through with Neptune is like almost invariably something that you knew was going to go a certain way, but that you talked yourself out of, or someone else talked you out of believing that. And therefore you got into a situation, it winds up going a little bit weird. And then you're like, damn it, I knew that. I knew it was going to go that way, but I didn't trust myself. So in terms of how you relate to other people, doing so in a very intuitive way is going to help with this transit a lot. And that's also probably going to be a lot of the crux of the lesson that's coming through with this, so that you are able to relax into and to be compassionate with the people that you are in connection with as well. But yeah, I hope that makes sense. I'm also going to be talking about the fact that this Neptune transit is quite unique because it's starting out in partnership with Saturn in this house as well, which is kind of helpful in a lot of ways. So we'll talk about Saturn going through this house quite soon. We'll talk about them being there together as well, and how that's fitting into these broader configurations and alignments that we're going to be experiencing in the coming year as well. But meanwhile, I do hope that this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Scorpio, we have Neptune in Aries transiting through your 6th house, and your 6th house has to do with your routines, generally speaking. This is the area of activities that you put a lot of time and effort and energy into, the things that you have to do, that you have to take care of. So a lot of our day-to-day work routines, our errands, our chores show up in this place, as well as our crafts, the things that we do for work, the things that we do to support our livelihoods and our careers. This is also a place of a lot of organization, and health also shows up here. Typically, acute health things come up here. So I'll talk about that initially. There's a much increased sensitivity to your environment, your day-to-day environment. This Neptune sensitizes things, and this is the area of just the stuff that you do each day, mundane stuff. So even that environment can have you a bit more sensitive physically to those things. So I would pay attention to weird little inexplicable health things that crop up here and there. If you are getting a little sick or almost sick more than usual during this period of time, I would definitely look for underlying causes. That can be something that Neptune, in its little annoying indirect way, can be trying to show us, is that maybe there's a weakened immune system, or maybe there is some food that's causing inflammation to something that's leaving you susceptible to getting sick, or maybe there is some sort of toxic something, even if it's not literally a toxin, if it's just something that your system doesn't like anymore. That's another thing that I would pay attention to, is any developed allergies during this period of time. I have annoyingly experienced that in life, where Like I've had no problem with this thing, and then suddenly it seems to be an issue. So I'd be paying attention to those little things and not sweeping them under the rug. Also trying your best not to make assumptions about what you think the underlying cause may be. Additionally, with Neptune in the sixth, for instance, with people who have this as a natal signature, they do tend to report that alternative health practitioners tend to work a little bit better for them. I am not a doctor. I can't give medical advice, but if you are wanting to get a second or third opinion, I would recommend really digging into things and not allowing for instance, diagnoses that don't seem to be actually fixing the problem or just seem to be covering it up, or that just don't sit right with you, to get different opinions. And then also trying these more sensitive and subtle therapies that may also be quite helpful too. You may even find that meditation is really wonderful for you and may help you on the health side, but then also on the routine side of clearing your mind a bit more and making your routines, so the stuff that you need to put your mind on, that you need to do, making that a little bit easier or less resisted. So yeah, I would be paying attention to those little weird things that crop up here and there. It's likely that Neptune is doing its thing to try and point something out to you, but again, it's usually extraordinarily indirect when we're dealing with Neptune. So it's not necessarily going to be, oh, this area of you is clearly having an issue that's definitely going to get you to go to a doctor, and they're just going to put their finger on it right away. It can be a little bit more drawn out. It can be a lot more subtle than that too. So with that spoken to, focusing on this then as a matter of the efforts and the routine and things like this. So also this is going to be idealizing that, or at least causing you to want to create a more ideal routine. So you may find that you start to want to change that. Maybe there are organizational systems, or maybe there are little tweaks to your daily routine that you're wanting to make. I would recommend that. And I would also really recommend experimenting with those kinds of things with Neptune here. Just trying things out, see how it feels. If it sticks, it sticks. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Going with the flow and being kind of easy with things can help a lot with Neptune. So again, this can look like trying out different ideas about time management, or again, organization. I know there's all sorts of different ways of doing that. You may wind up going through a lot of them and then deciding that you just want to take pieces from each of them and create your own thing. That would seem to me like a very Neptunian way to wind up approaching that as well. Not to mention remaining open to anything that comes through intuitively along those lines of, hey, maybe if I tried this, it would help a little bit better. And maybe it's something kind of funky, like if you work at home, maybe working from your patio on some occasions can change things up and make things a little bit more pleasant, or even a little bit more like romanticized, or things like that. And maybe even identifying different parts of your routine that you can do in those ways. Like maybe that's where you can do a lot of brainstorming or whatever, and just kind of break up the standard routine. And this is going to be a long-term transit, so you don't need to figure everything out right away. It's going to continue to work around the edges with that. Now, also when it comes to your work, you're also really going to want to identify with that and feel that is meaningful as well. And it may feel frustrating if you feel like that's not the case. So if you feel like you can't really connect with your work, with your daily routine, that's likely to feel more scattering. You may find that there are issues that come up of brain fog, or again, like scattering efforts, things like that, wind up cropping up here and there. And you may even find that some of the fixes that you're trying to make, even around your routine, can start to scatter yourself. So paying attention to that, paying attention to when you are procrastinating, or when you are feeling like you're not exactly sure what you should be doing at a given time, looking under the surface of that a bit more, trying to create some answers around that, I think will be helpful to not having that become a prolonged issue. But again, directly on the work front, if you work for someone else, this may be a nice thing to talk to them about about if there's an aspect of your job that could feel a bit more meaningful to you if you were to be able to focus a bit more on doing it really, really well rather than doing it quickly, things like that. Or if there's a creative aspect of your work or something that you could put more creative energy into, trying to do that, trying to incorporate that more, I think would also be quite helpful if you want to stay in the same role. This may also wind up opening doors and creating weird, serendipitous, synchronistic experiences that lead you down a path that will cause you to actually change your job, that will cause you to find a path that's going to introduce you to a more ideal work environment or a more ideal job for you, a more meaningful job for you. You may also find that some of those little serendipitous things, usually Neptune will kind of entice us in a certain direction that winds up introducing us to something that can introduce us to something else. And before we know it, we're in a different kind of a position. And looking back, we can only say, wow, that was just a really weird path that I just went down, but it landed me here. So that's pretty cool. That's how Neptune tends to work. So on the one hand, remaining open to those weird little connections that are made or those ideas that crop up, those opportunities that seem to open up for you. And especially any intuitive hits that you wind up having around your career path and how you might be able to make that more to your liking. You may also find that this is encouraging a lot of like charitable or service-oriented work desires for you. So you could literally get involved with charities or community efforts or contributing to support systems for people. You may literally wind up in a field like that. That would be very Neptunian. And if you do, it's likely that that would be quite satisfying for quite a while. Again, this is going to be here for about 14 years. You may even find, because you have Aries in this house of yours, that you're figuring out how to create these opportunities for yourself as well. So this could be a creative hobby or an interest of yours. Maybe this is a craft, or maybe this is a skill that you have. Maybe it's something you've studied quite a bit and you find you're really excellent with, and you may be able to make that a part of your work, maybe even going out on your own. Initially, perhaps as a side hustle, but it may become then mainline for you. So if that's of interest to you, that is one way that this can be actively utilized as a transit. And I would recommend connecting with other people, remaining open to any opportunities or networking, things like this. If you have people who work for you or that you work with other people, they may also be a bit foggier during this time. So it will require some patience. And I know that that's super annoying, especially if there's a combination of not quite knowing exactly what's expected of you and then also feeling like the people around you aren't really holding up their end of things. That is something that can creep up with this kind of an alignment. And that may be an indication that you need to establish some firmer boundaries with your work and your energy and what you're willing to put into things. But it may also point out that you're just not quite in the right environment as well. Though this would also be quite helpful for a sort of gentle leadership style or leading by example, kindness shown to coworkers and employees. Maybe even a mentorship employee kind of a relationship would be quite nice here. But yeah, other than that, I would just recommend romanticizing your routine more. If you're able to, whenever you're able to, introduce music or something pleasant, something that is really ideal, that helps you to romanticize your life, your day-to-day life. For instance, if you work in an office, making the environment like redecorating so that it feels nicer, so that you're able to resonate with that more, so that the energy feels a bit cleaner, or just, again, more aligned to you. And similar to meditation, things like yoga, this kind of gentle additions to your routine that can make it more physically or emotionally or intellectually comfortable and relaxing. So introducing those softer aspects of life into your daily routine and prioritizing that as well. There's likely to be there's more to life than this aspect that winds up creeping into your routine. So this Neptune isn't going to be satisfied with long stretches of time where you're just trying to get to the next week and you are working your ass off and then going home, eating, getting ready for bed, sleeping, getting up the next day, doing the same thing. So trying to prioritize a gentleness into your schedule, I think, is also going to be quite important for this. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Scorpio. So I really hope that this transit treats you super well. We will very shortly be talking about Saturn in this place, as well as the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. We'll be talking about some of these other transits that are going on for you and contributing to this very shortly. So hopefully that can also round out this picture. Yeah, again, I hope that it treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Sagittarius, we have Neptune and Aries transiting through your 5th house. And the 5th house has to do with your creative self-expression. This has to do with the things that are really pleasing to you, that you enjoy. So hobbies, interests, the connections that you have with people simply for the sake of really enjoying them, as well as your children and that which you create. That all shows up in this house. And so it's likely that you're going to have a lot of experience of feeling that you are idealizing these experiences and these connections. You may feel extraordinarily inspired at different points. So if you are at all a creative type, this is going to be a really wonderful transit for you because it should have that sense of the muse being with you quite a bit. You may also find that you are magnetized toward different kinds of creative mediums or different expressive mediums. So if you are already a creative type, you may be drawn in a different direction to add something new to what it is that you do and therefore learn more about yourself creatively and how you express yourself. But if you're not already, you may actually be drawn in that direction to be more creative, to engage in personal self-expression more. But if this isn't speaking specifically to creativity, as in like art, this can also just have you going down these different interesting paths of interests and passions and activities that really light you up. So as I alluded to, Neptune can lead us in like different directions. So sometimes it will magnetize us or pull us in one direction. In your case, this would be a specific kind of an interest and then a different kind of an interest, and basically pulling you in different directions at different periods of time. And that can be a little annoying to human beings who like to know where they're going or like to know what they're going to be experiencing. And we can be led by Neptune and then assume that that's the destination. So I'll give you a really concrete example. Maybe you get really into thrillers or something like thriller books. And then you get really into suspense as a genre. And you thought that you were going all in on thrillers. You wind up joining a book club, etc. And then you kind of get a little maybe bored of that. Maybe you go in this other direction. And then ultimately you wind up circling back and you get really into psychology, generally speaking. And so all of this, like even getting into thrillers, which wound up pulling you into suspense, which wound up pulling you into psychology, the whole thing was to get you to something broader, something bigger that may not feel like it connects directly to the first thing that you were pulled into, but you can see how you are led down this interesting kind of winding path. I hope that makes sense. But usually as well with Neptune, you'll find that there were really wonderful experiences and pieces of knowledge or pieces of this kind of broadening of your horizons, broadening of your range, essentially, that Neptune winds up encouraging in us by pulling us in these different paths. So it's not a linear path, is what I'm trying to say. It's not just like, oh, when Neptune goes into your 5th house, you're going to have a new hobby and you're going to go with that for the rest of your life. That in and of itself is a little bit unlikely. I would expect at least that anything that Neptune pulls you toward, that it will shift and change, and it will be kind of like a river does in terms of shifting direction and then splintering off into different directions as well. The thing with this is, though, the 5th house is such a wonderful place because it is what we really enjoy. And Neptune encourages us to enjoy things. It really idealizes what it's connected to. And it can even put things on a really high pedestal or almost exalt things. And so when it comes to like creative appreciation, even music appreciation, enjoyment of movies or films, like in terms of suspension of disbelief, this should also be really helpful with that. If that's something that you've ever struggled with quite a bit, like enjoying fiction or enjoying movies, this should enable you to just kind of relax into it and seep into art a lot more. Or again, activities, interests, hobbies. So if you feel like you've been in a rut recently, this is also going to encourage connecting with new things that you really love and that you really enjoy. And that should just blossom outward as well. There's also likely to be a real desire to create something ideal in your life. So if you are a parent, this could be really connecting with your children a lot and deeply desiring to serve their growth in a really ideal and wonderful way, being really supportive of them and their talents and their own ideals as well. You may even find that your children themselves are really putting on display what their beliefs and what their values and what their ideals are. And that would really encourage you then to also be supportive of those things, or also to learn through their experiences, or to be able to see things through their eyes as well, and therefore learn a lot. But if it's not children, then this can be a community around a specific similar interest, like-minded people that you want to connect with, creating a community around that. Or maybe this is writing meaningfully. Now, there is a bit of a risk of escapism or overdoing it on pleasure, over prioritizing pleasure at certain points in your life in the coming 14 years or so that you're going to have Neptune here. So I would watch out a bit for pleasurable substances or things like that, overdoing it basically, or getting really wrapped up in some kind of like a whirlwind romance or connections that are not founded on realistic expectations. So try to always make sure when it comes to your pleasures, when it comes to your hobbies, your interests, also when it comes to your children, again, if you have children, to try to make sure that those connections and that your connection with these things is as grounded as possible, that you are checking in with that and asking yourself, is this really realistic and is it really good for me? Because Neptune can really encourage us to go all in on whatever it's touching. And for you, this is a house of pretty much anything that's pleasurable. But yeah, ultimately, this is just going to encourage you so much to feel inspired to express yourself deeply, authentically, to lead with your heart, to put your heart out there. This can also have you feeling really compassionate, like really connecting again with your sense of love for humanity or for children or for people that you're able to mentor or take under your wing. This could have you very compassionate and expressing a kind of compassionate leadership for other people. If there's anything that you know that you're really passionate about, that you've thought about teaching, you have a lot of alignments coming up that could be really supportive of that, as well as making a really strong impact on people with what it is that you're expressing and what it is that you're teaching. Additionally, specifically when it comes to writing or art, if that has been at all an interest of yours or something that you've thought about getting into, I would just so encourage it with these alignments that you have coming up, and especially this Neptune in the 5th house, because you should have something of an endless well of inspiration. And while it may not ever anchor down into just one thing or just one specific kind of a medium, this is really what life is all about, right? Is enjoying things and expanding yourself through your joy and expanding your heart, right? Through doing what you love and connecting with what you love and supporting those that you love. And there's so much opportunity for that. Like Neptune's really going to be opening a lot of doors to be able to idealize people, to be able to idealize interests, to be able to idealize your experience of beauty and your ability to really open your heart. Finally, I would say if you do have children, I would do your best to make sure that the communication lines are as open as possible. Because if they're going through anything that's a little bit strange or anything that's a little confusing, like they may be a bit confused about their sense of identity, or they may be a bit confused about individuating. And if you're able to kind of utilize this Neptune in your 5th house to really take them under your wing and be really supportive of them and their growth through this period of time, to try and be patient with any confusion that they may be experiencing about life or their place in the world, that would be really wonderful with this alignment too. But yeah, ultimately, just following your heart, following your passions, there's a real permission for you to do that, as well as to release some social expectations that may have you feel inhibited at times. So if that's been something that you've struggled with at all, is inhibiting yourself or worrying about what other people are going to think if you are truly yourself, this is encouraging you to just don't worry about it. Be yourself, lean into your passions, lean into your heart, lean into what really feels right to you. And as long as you're not, of course, leaning into substances that could be a problem, or you're not getting swept up in an unrealistic whirlwind or something like this, then it should go over really quite well. And I think that you're going to learn a huge amount about yourself and what you love through this period of time. So yeah, this is a really great place to have this transiting through. And I think that's pretty much what I have for you. So I hope it treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Capricorn, we have Neptune in Aries transiting through your fourth house. And your fourth house has to do with your home, your family, your roots, your past, your private life, your emotional core. This is where you go to settle down. And to have Neptune moving through this area, there's likely to be a really strong idealization around this. So idealizing your home, that can come through certainly in trying to clear the energy, especially. So this can have you creating something of a sanctuary of your home, creating a place where you can go and just feel really relaxed and comfortable and not need to worry about all of the other aspects of life when you're in that space. So redecorating, doing a lot of smudging, maybe incense, things like that are going to start to appeal a lot more, or you may be engaging in that a lot more. You may even find that there's some kind of idealization of a home environment that inclines toward wanting to move or wanting to go somewhere else. This makes this area a lot more fluid. So you may feel a bit confused as to where you're living, whether you want to stay there, whether you want to go somewhere else. You may feel pulled to living in a specific kind of a situation. So for instance, if you have always lived with other people, this could be you wanting to have your own space and really idealizing that and planning ahead and trying to come up with ideas about how you would be most comfortable at home. There's this imaginative quality that's really satisfying with Neptune, and that it certainly encourages. And like I said, it can also just kind of pull you in different directions, like magnetizing you toward certain living situations. Maybe this is a neighborhood that you've wanted to live in for a long time, and you're getting a bit more serious about wanting to make that happen or trying to figure out a way to make that happen. What's interesting about Neptune is that it can create opportunities. It can, more so along the lines though of like a pathway, it can create a pathway for you to get to either where you're wanting to go or to get to something that it's trying to draw you toward. And this would be, again, a home environment, a private life that is a lot more comfortable for you. So also, if you are creating a family or you have a created family, if you're partnered up, if you have children, this will also be trying to guide you in those connections, those relationships, and that home environment of how do you want to relate with your family? How do you want to guide your children? What kind of home environment do you want for your children to grow up in? What kind of neighborhood? What kind of community do you want for your children to have? You want them to have like a closer relationship with their grandparents, for instance, or something along these lines. So a lot of these questions are likely to be coming up in different phases in the coming years. And this can come up with some confusion as well. So it's difficult to put our finger on with our own human minds, try and figure out what it is that Neptune is trying to lead us toward, or what it is that Neptune is trying to point out to us. And usually there's a lot of healing involved. Usually there's a lot of like looking at things from different perspectives than we have before. And that can show up as what we would perceive as confusion or feeling a bit foggy, feeling a bit up in the air about what's going on. And I tend to encourage trying to stay open to what Neptune is bringing to us. It usually is quite beneficial, but again, in those moments, it can feel quite frustrating of not knowing exactly where are these feelings coming from or where are these feelings leading me. And so these questions about what you want your family life to look like, what you want your home life to look like, where you want to live, they will be very important. And I wouldn't diminish that at all. But I would also say Neptune has an interesting way of solving problems, of leading us in the right direction. So if you do find yourself frustrated or fearful around confusion in these areas, to try and give it time and try and remain open, and maybe try not to stress yourself out too much about needing to nail things down, because that's what's difficult to do with Neptune. This can also point to boundaries things coming up. So Neptune tends to seep through whatever structures we may try to create. And you may find that that's something of a frustration within family or with certain family members, that there's a way of either pushing your buttons, or that the things that are said feel more like they're getting under your skin, kind of, or that the boundaries that you try to set seem to not hold as well as usual. So if that's the case with specific people, it's going to help a bit that we also have Saturn with that Neptune on the front end of this transit. And I will very shortly be talking about specifically Saturn in this place for you, and then how they're likely to work together in future videos, probably like within the month or so. So I'll be going into this a bit more, but that will help on the front end of this transit with ensuring that some of the redefinition that we're doing around, in your case for Capricorn, family and home and things like this, isn't structureless. The structure is being rebuilt. It is still very much present. So hopefully that can train this Neptune a bit to not be too overly fluid when it comes to your boundaries. But I will say that the extent to which you can better and better understand, maybe study, read up on, watch videos about what is healthy behavior within families, what's not, how to set boundaries in a compassionate and kind of careful way so that you don't wind up feeling guilty, things like that, because that can also be a major thing that comes up with Neptune itself, but certainly with Saturn and Neptune together. There can be this feeling of guilt about just creating reasonable structures, right? So I would recommend just focusing in on that a bit more, trying to clarify that, trying to build that up, and just keeping that in the back of your mind. Additionally, if you are renting, this can cause some blurred lines there as well. So really knowing what your contract is saying, what the different clauses are, if someone suddenly says, oh, something needs to be repaired, or, oh, I'm going to be selling the home, or whatever, knowing exactly ahead of time what's allowable and what's not is also going to be quite important. If you own your own property, I would do your best not to overlook any repairs or any weakened structural aspects, be it pipes or foundation or anything like that. I'm not remotely an expert in this area, but Neptune can have a way of, again, softening those boundaries. So anything physical, I wouldn't be overlooking if something appears to be weakening. I'd also certainly be keeping an eye on your mortgage contracts and taxes and things like this too. We can't really know more than what's black and white and on paper, but as long as we do know that, then any of the unnecessary confusion or fogginess that may come up with Neptune there, at least you can reassure yourself by what's on the paper, what's legal, and utilize those frameworks. Now, this can also have you curious about, wondering about ancestry, those kinds of questions, and especially anything emotional along those lines. So emotional family patterning, conditioning. You may feel like you have a handle on how you perceive your childhood to have been, but there may be things that are, again, seeping in. Neptune can bring these things to us very gently, very subtly into our subconscious. And so if you feel confusion about things that happened in the past, or you feel memories coming up, that's likely to be this Neptune trying to point something out about patterns, about things that may have been overlooked, about things that you may have perceived in too narrow a lens, right? And even with specific family members, there can be some confusion. I think I kind of alluded to this in the beginning, but this Neptune can show up in your family, as in that Neptune showing up kind of embodied within a person in your family. And so you may find that there's just a lot of confusion about your relationship with someone, where you stand with them, what their beliefs are, the direction that they're going, You may also have a family member that's becoming very spiritual or very imaginative, very creative. If this is showing up as a child, it might be really nice to support any sort of creative inclinations that they're showing through this period of time. Additionally, on a kind of side note, in terms of idealizing your home, one thing that Neptune works quite well with is music and the arts. And so the more that you can incorporate that into your home environment, into your private life, that can also really support the sense of sanctuary at home too. Also, if you've had any ideas, like it's coming to mind, of a really wonderful garden area or something, like an area within your home that you've really wanted to decorate or create in some way or another, I'd recommend prioritizing it with this. That's going to give that Neptune something to really focus on and to be able to pour the best of itself into, which is the imagination, the form, the creativity, the comfort. You may also find that there's a lot of serendipity and synchronicity that crops up within your home and family life. So, for instance, if you're looking for a home, I would really be following your intuition, following your gut. This is the kind of thing where, for instance, there's an event that you may or may not be that interested in going to, but if you do, then you wind up meeting someone who gives you a really excellent tip on a property that you wind up buying or something like that. There's usually a couple steps removed from the actual source of what Neptune is like leading toward. That's why it always seems to me like it lays out a path for us. But that's where that synchronicity lies. That's where that serendipity lies, is these weird wandering paths that can lead us to really wonderful results, but we do have to be open to it. You may also find that there's someone that your family knows that can be really wonderful for you as well, or that they wind up introducing opportunities to you or opening doors to you, that they say just the right thing to kind of get your mind going in a specific direction that winds up being really excellent for you. There may even be these weird slips, like even Freudian slips, that can help to clarify certain emotional patterns that maybe you don't need to deal with it directly with them. Neptune is very indirect. So I would say when it comes to the emotional patterns that come up, I wouldn't interpret these as things that you should necessarily like grab onto and deal with a family member, but they can open your eyes and maybe even your third eye to certain situations that you may have been overlooking, or that may just have not presented themselves to you up until this point. But for instance, with Neptune and Aries, perhaps a family member revealing some aspect of their personality that you haven't quite put your finger on yet. And the impact maybe that being around someone like that has had on you and your conditioning and your sense of where you come from, your sense of who you are, and therefore what's possible for you. So the best way with Neptune generally to approach these kinds of transits is, again, to just kind of remain open to the insights that it can bring, remain open to the weird wandering paths that it can wind up opening up to you as well. Trying to stay on top of any evidentiary information that you have access to with regard to these things. So again, any sort of property contracts, home contracts, leases, things like that. Making sure you're not just signing on to things, because there can even be experiences of deception where Neptune can show us where we've been too lax with certain things that we easily could have known if we had been paying attention or we had been following our gut. Because often we're also obnoxiously going to know ahead of time that something's going to turn out a certain way. We can quell that voice and say, oh, it's no big deal, or I just want to get this done. Let's just get this done and over with. And then wind up, for instance, signing on to a contract that has a clause that you just didn't really think about. So still paying attention to the evidence, but staying open to these serendipitous connections and insights that can be provided in this area. And then, really looking at your home as sanctuary is going to be really wonderful as well, because there is going to be a heightened sensitivity, like an internally heightened sensitivity that you'll be experiencing with this transit too. So trying to take care of that and respect that, I think, is also going to be really important. But I think that's pretty much what I have for you, Capricorn, for Neptune in this place. Like I said, I'm going to be talking about Saturn going through this house and their conjunction to each other very soon as well. And that should give more layers to this and how it's likely to play out in the coming years. But I do hope that it treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Aquarius, we have Neptune in Aries transiting through your third house. So the third house has to do with your mind, your communication, your community, the people, places, things that you connect with, typically on a day-to-day basis. It also has a lot to do with learning and teaching, like exchanging information, basically. People that are associated with this as well, the day-to-day people that you connect with. Neighbors, peers, siblings also show up in the third house. And Neptune's going to bring a lot of inspiration to this area. It's going to bring a lot of intuition to your mind. It's going to bring a lot of idealization around these areas as well. So when it comes to your communication, this is likely to be very inspired through this period of time. You actually have a lot of indications about your own personal self-expression going through some really wonderful and deeply profound shifts and changes in the coming years, really with all of these alignments. I'm showing all of the outer planets because they're all ingressing in similar periods of time. One of the next videos we do is going to be about Saturn doing its transit through Aries. We'll do one about the fact that they're doing this together. We're also going to talk about Uranus moving into Gemini, into your fifth house quite shortly. But the way that these all flow together for you in particular is really focused on how it is that you express yourself verbally, creatively, personally, what your goals are, what you're excited about, what you're thinking about, what you're like active with. So it's really fun. I love these alignments for you. But this one in particular can really be infusing a lot of inspiration and enthusiasm and optimism and like care, consideration, warmth, a real beauty to your style of communication. Also to the content of your communication, what it is that you're talking about could be very spiritualized or very much more creative. It can even be more idealized. So what are your personal philosophical values? You're likely to feel a lot more in touch with that and feeling a desire to hold that mantle, to really represent and speak for your values. You may also find yourself rooting for people quite a bit, like being very supportive of those around you verbally, whether it be to them, to build them up and to support them, or whether it be the kind of spiritual warrior aspect of Neptune and Aries and taking people to task for treating others in a way that is not in alignment with your personal values or how they are wanting to be treated. So you may find yourself really taking on this role of advocate when it comes to your community around you and thinking a whole lot about how your community structures function and how they may be better improved, basically. So I would expect if you've been less social recently, which I think most people have since COVID, they've been socializing somewhat less. If that's been the case, this can really set into motion more connections and more idealized connections that you're building through this time. Building up more ideal community ties is a major aspect of this general alignment for you, Saturn involved as well. But also when this comes to your mind, Neptune is going to be in your mind, in your mental space as well, which can be really wonderful for intuition, and it can be incredibly inspiring to your thoughts. Like your thoughts themselves, your mental process itself is likely to be, again, more optimistic, more idealistic, more intuitive, more connected and tapped into that which is going on beneath the surface of things. You may find that you know things without being able to explain them. Now, that can sound wonderful. It's kind of maddening as well. So think about that. Try to keep that in mind, that when we know something to be true, but we cannot evidence it to other people, sometimes telling other people about what we know can be one of the most frustrating things, because we can feel like we're crazy. We can feel like we're just kind of saying things when you know deep down in your bones that what you're saying is true, but think about it. Do you have evidence for it? And if not, you can still fully know that without a doubt, but people might ask for evidence and they might be a bit weird if you're not able to provide that. Or if you just say, well, this is what my intuition is telling me. So keep in mind who it is that you're connecting with and who it is that you're talking to about those things. And also making sure that you are checking things against the evidence. So is your intuition completely flying in the face of everything that you're seeing? That might be worth thinking about a bit and trying to take note of, not to dismiss one or the other in particular, but this can happen without losing your logic. This can happen while you're still able to grasp the bigger picture, even as you are seeing it in the world. But sometimes those things can disconnect, and it may be difficult to really put your finger on when that is happening. So that's one of those little trip up things that can happen with Neptune in the third that's worth keeping an eye open for, is any sort of risk of mental fogginess or a lack of clarity around whether what you're feeling is very true deep down in your bones is really true. Most of the time it will be, but sometimes Neptune can lead us a bit astray. Now, there's virtually always a really wonderful silver lining when it does do that. There's almost always a purpose and a lesson that is the type of lesson that you're likely to be very grateful for experiencing. I don't find, knock on wood, but I don't find that Neptune is at all like malicious about misleading. To me, it pulls us in directions that we wouldn't otherwise go. And so sometimes it needs to have things up in the air in order to get us somewhere that we would not have gone on our own. But sometimes it also wants to point out to us ways in which we're open to deception or open to misinformation or open to a lack of clarity of thought, and just kind of leading us in that way. It can gently show that to us, and then we know. And that is very, very, very valuable. So any sort of self-limiting beliefs about who you are in your community, or any sort of, oh, I feel like I'm picking up on something from this person, and then it turns out that it was something completely different, just kind of taking note of that, because again, there's likely to be a valuable lesson in it. For instance, did you assume that someone doesn't like you, or that they kind of have it out for you, or anything like that, and then discovered that that was not the case? That might be a really wonderful lesson then in, hey, maybe it's better to just assume the best and then let people prove you wrong when it comes to things like that, right? Or maybe it doesn't matter really what other people think. And so trying not to then maybe get fixated on that. These are the different kinds of interesting lessons that it can show us through leading us down a garden path at times, which it does for sure. But it also leads us and magnetizes us towards certain things that sometimes we can get a bit overly attached to. Like, for instance, this could be if you are a writer, that's something that shows up in the third house. So Neptune here could introduce you to a new subgenre of writing, and you can wind up going super hard in that direction and studying as much as you can about it, and then starting to engage in it. And then either you find that you're not as into it as you thought you were, maybe the interest has waned, or you could be then introduced to something significantly different. And you feel like, okay, now I want to go all in on this. And I thought that this other thing was the destination, but it's really that this is the destination. It's like, honestly, probably neither of them are. It's just trying to teach you a lot. It's just trying to broaden the heck out of your range of experience, and any sort of boundaries or blockages that you may have. It's trying to wear those down and give you a broader perspective of whatever it is that you're doing. So third house, your community ties, your role within your community. This can be your role with peers. This can also be your writing style, your communication style, your thought processes, your opinions of things, including yourself. So expect for that to get broadened through those weird little experiences of being serendipitously or synchronistically aligned with really wonderful opportunities to learn more and to connect more. You will also very likely find that the words that you say and the communication that you share with other people carries during this period of time a greater spiritual or creative or other kinds of impact. So the impact of it is more thorough. It crosses the boundaries of other people a little bit more. I'm trying to figure out how to actually articulate this well. It's more likely to seep into people. So it's more likely to wind up planting some really interesting seeds for other people that wind up sticking with them for quite some time. And it may be very subtle, but there is a really strong influence to your words through this period of time. Pluto in your first house is also going to be really increasing the impact that you have on other people. So these are things to keep in mind, that people are also going to be really magnetized toward you and what you have to say, and your words are going to have a big impact. So try to think them through and try to be a little bit more gentle or a little bit more choosy about how you express things to other people, especially how you express things about people to them, because you're likely to be hitting people in these really interesting, subtle ways that may wind up sticking with them the way that sometimes things do for like decades. I don't know if there's like words that someone said to you like 20 years ago or something that still stick with you, but that's definitely the case for me. And this would be really encouraging of having that kind of influence on people and possibly even on the choices that they wind up making as well. So as I alluded to, there is a lot of idealism here around community connection. So this could have you desiring to engage in community aid efforts, mutual aid efforts within your community. It is a bit more localized in the third house than like these global kinds of ideals or whatever it is. So it's closer to home. It's more within the familiar environment or online. The third house can also be the internet or online communities that are a little tighter knit. And connecting with people that feel really aligned to you, and connecting with causes, or connecting with some ideal that you want to fight for, that you want to show up for, that you want to pour your energy into in the coming 14 years or so that Neptune's going to be there. You should be running into some very spiritually aligned people, some really wonderful people that may share a lot of wisdom with you and wind up leading you quite a bit as well. Similar to how you are going to have a really strong impact on other people, that is a two-way street there. And overwhelmingly, this should be extraordinarily positive. Occasionally, there can be some deception. But like I said, for the most part, when it comes to the deception that Neptune brings in, it's trying to show you where your boundaries are a little bit too fluid. It's showing you where things are able to seep in. So taking note of that and trying to rectify that is really the best way to respond to any sort of deception that may crop up here and there. You may even be just a bit confused about the direction that your community is going in. So feeling like your community is changing quite a bit and that you're not quite sure what your role is going to be in that community, or you may even feel something of a wanderlust arise at certain points and want to connect with some other kind of community, or want to explore new territories and make those territories familiar. There may be an idealized place that you want to live. This could be local, like, boy, I love that neighborhood and it's a little bit outside of my reach, but I really want to live there. And then at some point you wind up then experiencing that. Or this could be just picking whatever city you really idealize and boy, I would really love to live there. And then serendipitously, synchronistically, and sometimes through those little weird offshoots, those weird detours, sometimes the Neptune detours are actually putting you on the track for an opportunity that you would not have expected. So that's why I always say, try not to get too locked in on destinations when it comes to Neptune. And I'm also kind of preaching this time around because I think it's a really great way to look at it. When it comes to manifesting, a lot of people like to say toward the end of what it is that they're asking for or something better. And that to me is really what Neptune represents, is that or something better, that flexibility to allow for things to unfold as they will, to lead you to something better than you would even wind up imagining for yourself. Now, this may mean that you don't always get exactly what you think that you want, but you might just get something a lot better. So in terms of your sense of community, your sense of belonging, your sense of familiarity with wherever it is that you're connecting into, I would expect a huge amount of really wonderful serendipitous, synchronistic moments to occur. And so try to stay open to those things is one major piece of advice that I would give for this alignment for you. But yeah, like I said, we're going to look into some of these other alignments. You've got the air signs. I have Gemini rising, and I have to say, when it comes to Aquarius and Gemini and Libra rising, it is so cool, the alignments that we get to experience in the coming years. So yeah, it's much nicer, so much nicer than it's been in the past decade plus, really, for all of us. So enjoy it, look forward to it, step into it, stay open to it, and I hope that this treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Pisces, we have Neptune in Aries will be transiting through your second house. And your second house has to do with your own personal resources. So quite literally finances, income, properties, possessions, things like this. But it also has a lot to do with what you value and what your values are. So valuation, security, that comes through a lot with this house. And there's going to be some ebbs and flows when it comes to all of these things. So yeah, when it comes to money, there may be periods of time where that's unpredictable, where it comes in those flows, where there's much that comes in and then there's much less that comes in at different points. So making sure that you're really steady with saving, I think is going to be really helpful for this transit, especially if you're able to get good at that on the front end, or if you're already good at that, that's going to save you so many headaches with this transit. And especially because this is likely to have you wanting to align more strongly with your personal values, especially when it comes to your money. So connecting your livelihood, your resources, that which you bring in, that which you are living from basically, with your personal values, with your creativity, with your imagination. So this could wind up spurring you on, and it may surprise you down the road. This may not be something that you've been thinking about yet, but it may wind up spurring you on to want to go independent or to want to follow a more creative path or something along those lines. And of course, if you do wind up doing that, then those ebbs and flows are pretty self-explanatory, as that kind of thing is less often associated with a specific kind of wage income that's predictable. So giving yourself the space to do that as well, that may be another really wonderful reason to save, is even if you don't quite know what you're saving for yet, if you are able to, it may be very wonderful just because it gives you the freedom to allow for that Neptune to play out and offer you the opportunities that you're really wanting when it comes to how it is that you earn a livelihood. You may even find that you are less and less materialistic throughout the 14 years that Neptune is going to be in this house. So identifying less strongly with material things and more on what you truly value. So this will clarify that at times. Of course, there's going to be moments where you feel like you're pulled in one direction and then another. And I wouldn't be surprised if there are experiences that pull you toward the value of material things and then toward the value of not relying upon material things, such that you're able to get a really much fuller image of what you truly want, what you truly desire to grow in your life, and what you really want to prioritize and focus upon when it comes to creating the kind of security and comfort and lifestyle as well that is really comfortable for you. And yeah, I think I kind of alluded to it, but this can specifically say that you are making money from intuitive practices, from healing practices, from creative things, from imaginative work, through spiritual work. And even if that's not your sole income, this would encourage you in that direction. Now, also, it's likely to make you feel quite generous, especially at certain points. So if you hear a certain story that really touches you or you find quite moving, you may find that the boundaries around what's yours and what belongs to others or what should be provided to others may be a bit foggy. So it would be very worthwhile to have some pretty strict boundaries with yourself about what it is that you're going to give away of yourself and of your energy and of your resources. And that can even be the emotional labor that you provide. That can be literal money. That can be your advice. That can be opening your home to someone. That can be time that you are providing to charity. That can be overtime that you tend to overlook. That can be taking taking work home with you and not charging for that. Things like this, it's going to be really important to have pretty clear boundaries ahead of time so that you're not trying with Neptune in that house to assert boundaries in the moment, because that's usually when we can get very confused and then be like, well, I'm just going to err on the side of caution here and be generous, right? And then I'll deal with cleaning it up later. So try, if you can, to be very clear with yourself about what those boundaries are. Hopefully this month, before this winds up moving into that place permanently. But at any point that you're able to clarify that with yourself, and I'm sure that you will have experiences where those boundaries are crossed, and just taking note of it, trying not to be jerky with yourself about it, trying not to be like very disappointed or something like that, but just learning through all of those processes. That's the thing with Neptune, is that it leads us to a lot of lessons that we need to learn so that we're in a better position going forward. And sometimes that can be a little bit annoying. Sometimes it can show up as someone deceiving us because we need to learn about the fact that people can deceive you in that way, right? Which sucks, but then we know. And that's a lot of, again, the value of the quote unquote downsides of Neptune, where it brings in lessons. There is almost always that kind of really strong silver lining of, honestly, I'm just grateful that I know this now. You may also be very inspired to be very charitable. And that's wonderful. If you have the time and the resources to do that kind of thing, that would really satisfy this Neptune quite a bit, and it would probably feel incredibly rewarding. Mutual aid, any sort of community projects. If you want to, if you're pretty good with resources, if you have a mind for that kind of thing, then this could also indicate that you're helping other people with that. And reinforcing some of what I was saying about materialism, this redefining security beyond material measures, coming back to the sense of what does truly make us feel secure. Usually there's human aspects to that. And we have created a society in which we can kind of get away with not having those really good connections by just earning enough money. And so it can almost feel like money is more securing than those connections are. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be some interesting experiences here that reinforce your sense of value of the people around you, the connections that you have. Your freedom is likely to be something that you're really valuing around this time as well, with Aries in your second house getting kind of spurred on here. Desiring independence would be normal for you. Neptune's going to be reminding you about that, about the importance of you being able to pursue your own path and create your own priorities, create your own values, name them for yourself, and be able to pursue them without too much getting caught up with status or materialism or things like that, right? So being able to call the shots is something that is going to look more and more glamorous and nice. It's something that you are magnetized toward. But also then, again, redefining that sense of security, probably away from some of with Saturn there, and we're going to talk about this in the coming month quite a bit. I'm going to do this video about Neptune. We're going to do a whole video about Saturn specifically in this house, and then we're going to talk again about them together in this place in Aries and what that's going to mean. But on the front end, there may be a bit of a push and pull about like, okay, how much do I care about material status kinds of things? There's probably going to be a bit of a push and pull where you're going to be encouraged to still be very practical. But then once that Saturn has made that point clear about, well, let's not just completely give up the reins, right? When it comes to making sure that you're good materially, then we can reinforce and just kind of sit there with Neptune, wearing away at some of the edges of that, softening that up and bringing you back to a sense of spiritual security, emotional security, security in your connections with others, security in your relationship with yourself, security as in like self-esteem and trust in yourself that you will do what is correct in any given situation. And so maybe you don't need to catastrophize about certain experiences that may or may not ever happen in the future, or worry about things quite as much because well, whatever comes, I know that I'm going to respond to it in a responsible manner. So that's fine. Things like this. So coming back to a deeper sense of security than just the kind of capitalistic aspects of that we're usually focused on these days. Now, I will say, yes, there is a risk at times of swindling with Neptune in this place. So keeping your eyes open, trying to be as responsible as you can, trying not to be, I don't want to use the word gullible, but maybe a little bit naive about certain people when it comes to your resources, trying to pay attention to your intuition when it comes to either opportunities or requests from other people, trying to not give fully into, with Pisces there, you would naturally pity people quite a lot. Trying not to let that be a wool that is able to be pulled over your eyes. And this is easier said than done, and it's also just part of being a Pisces that sometimes that happens. And we are very fortunate in that we usually have a lot of spiritual backing to course correct for us when we get a little confused and we overgive. But that is something to kind of keep in mind, is that your accounts, checking your statements, making sure that everything is legitimately authorized and that there's not some kind of side access to an account, making sure that there aren't, for instance, subscriptions leaking finances of yours that you're not even using those subscriptions or something like this. Paying attention to where you might be spending money in a way that isn't improving your quality of life, and seeing if maybe you can bring some of that down as well. But also, I wouldn't say to neglect the quality of life just in favor of a dry kind of hard-nosed saving, kind of an attitude. I would certainly encourage being smart about saving, just because of the fact that there might be a moment here where you're wanting to make a change to your livelihood. And of course, having a solid savings to rely upon when those things come up, or if there's a transition period that's coming up or something, that's really great. But again, this isn't about just over idealizing or over aggrandizing cash or anything like that, or possessions, or almost the worship of money. This probably won't go in that direction, but in extreme cases, it potentially could. So I just want to remind, that's not what this is about, but being smart about those things to the extent that you can, I think is also really quite helpful. So paying attention to if people are hitting you up for money quite a bit, are they trying to help themselves too? That might be a critical question to ask yourself. Things like this that can be a little frustrating at the moment, especially for Pisces, but is definitely worth keeping in mind. But yeah, other than that, I would just, again, really listen to your intuition when it comes to opportunities and when it comes to the livelihood that you truly want for yourself. How do you want to bring in the money that you live from? And how do you want to utilize that? And how is that tied to your quality of life? Reinforcing the positive aspects of that as much as you can. You should have a huge amount of opportunities to do that. Neptune will kind of serendipitously pull you or magnetize you in certain directions, which should be pretty helpful. But yeah, there's a huge opportunity to expand. That's one thing that Neptune can do, is really tap you into other sources of resources and things like that. So it should be really good. But again, just try your best to keep your head on straight and make sure that you have some boundaries around your resources, be it emotional or material or otherwise. So yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Pisces. So I really hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me.